Our story begins with a young man in a white jacket and a red helmet walking along, saying he was going out to make a delivery. He sits on his red motorcycle and starts adjusting his helmet, saying that he's going to put on a show on the road, until he puts his hand on the gas and he realizes something, which quickly leaves him in a state of doubt. It was a kind of skull keychain. The boy wondered what it was and if Hyung had bought it for him, and he thought it was kind of cool. And then he thinks for a moment, asking himself if he should buy something in return for Hyung. And off he goes, accelerating his motorcycle. He arrived at a building called 102, and next to it was a photo studio called Zen. The customer, surprised, picks up his delivery and comments that the guy is always very quick. And then the delivery man turns away, waving, and he thanks the customer for ordering with them and says he hopes to see him again later. And again, with a smile on his face, he thanks the customer for placing his order with the Wok brothers. Then he starts down the stairs, whistling. He puts his hand in his pocket, then tells himself that he should take a look at the next trip, and he sees that it's at Grandma Kim's house. He quickly sits on his bike and tells himself that he can do it in 15 minutes, and he quickly speeds off on his motorcycle through the city. He's really fast, and his bike is a high cylinder. Then, suddenly, the system panel appears right next to his face, saying it's a pleasure to meet you, and says the boy's name, which is Tija. And then, the panel tells the delivery man, who is carrying the optimized route, to Grandma Kim's address. It would be the fastest and safest route, but this makes the delivery man a little apprehensive, and he quickly stops his bike, really scared, and with a tone of doubt, he takes off his helmet and wonders what that was. And he also wonders if it was his new helmet, and stares at the helmet in his hands, until he sees that the sound isn't coming from the helmet, and the voice introduces itself, saying that her name is Hela, and she is a spirit residing in his keychain. And Tija quickly looks at his keychain, and he doesn't understand anything, in doubt about the name Hela, and he picks up the key ring to have a look, and he asks if there really is a spirit there, and Hela answers the protagonist, saying that she has a purpose for him. Hela says that the estimated travel time for the ideal route she has provided is 10 minutes, and she makes it clear that she will pay $1,000 if he manages to arrive in 5 minutes. And the delivery man wonders if she really just said $1,000, and Hela goes on to say that that's not all, and if he manages to do it in less than 5 minutes, she'll grant him an extra $1,000 for every minute he saves. So, for example, if he manages to do it in 3 minutes, he'll get $3,000. And the delivery man, after hearing Hela say this, comments that it seems more like a mission than a test, and he thinks it's working like a video game. And Hela tells the protagonist that it's okay, he can think of it as the mission. It's optional, and he can think of it any way he wants. And then she asks him if he will accept the mission. And at that, he gets a little pensive, until he simply sighs and denies it, saying that he's fine. And Hela doesn't understand anything. The spirit has been taken by surprise, and asks the protagonist why not, and Tija puts on his helmet, telling the spirit that he has no idea what its intentions are. So he wonders how he can trust Hela, and after hearing this, Hela asks the delivery man if he's rejecting the offer because he doesn't trust him, and Tija quickly answers Hela by saying yes. At which point he asks Hela if the spirit can leave him alone now, and Hela says that this is a relief, but the protagonist at that moment, and Hela comments that she thought it was because Tija knew he'd never make it, and asks if he's wrong that there's no way the protagonist could have made that delivery in less than 5 minutes, and the delivery man is a little upset by what he's just heard. He begins to adjust the helmet, telling Hela that this spirit had better have that money, and then the spirit answers the protagonist, saying that he has the money, and he wants to know if Tija has the courage, and the protagonist puts his hand on the accelerator, and he starts to speed up, telling Hela that he'd better keep his word, and Hela makes it clear to the protagonist that only he should go ahead, and at that moment, the timer starts ticking. While Tija accelerates with everything, he tries to make the journey as quickly as possible, and at that moment, he asks Hela if he really is a spirit, because he thinks they've heard of jennies and lamps. He asks if spirits normally live in key rings, and Hela asks the delivery man if he's sure he has time to tell the spirit where it can and can't be with the spirit, and he makes it clear that 30 seconds have passed, and then the delivery man realizes, and thanks him for the reminder. Time was ticking away, and the delivery man began to pass through the corridor. He tries not to lose speed, and he tells the spirit that he knows a shortcut. And quickly, the scene shows the route, as if it were the GPS in Grand Theft Auto V. The timer showed that 1 minute and 20 seconds had passed, and the protagonist was standing in front of a staircase. He's quickly on his bike and starts running up that ladder, and Hela starts relocating the location. As he ran, the timer showed that 1 minute and 47 seconds had passed. He was passing through a community, and the spirit is in doubt and asks the Tija, Siri is sure that this is the right path because he is only moving away from his destination, and he makes it clear that even if the protagonist were to get back on his motorcycle now, he would never make it in time. He also says that the estimated travel time from there is 6 minutes, and the protagonist asks if he's serious that it's 6 minutes, and while the timer shows that 1 minute and 55 seconds have passed, he jumps over a railing, saying he just needs a minute. He jumps from a high place, and Hela tells him that the protagonist is a damned madman, and at that moment, he holds a barand off he went, asking the spirit if he had been called by Hela, and a little miffed to see that it's working. He replies to Tija that it was nothing and a little annoyed. The protagonist says that this time, he'll let it go, and then he starts walking, until he arrives at a house and rings the doorbell, and the timer shows that 2 minutes and 50 seconds have passed, and at that moment, the old lady comes out of her house, and surprised, she asks if it was Tija, and the delivery man, a little uncomfortable, apologizes to the old lady for taking so long. At least that's what he thinks, because he was really fast, and he explains to the old woman that he met a stranger on the way, and she asks him to be careful out there, and not let his guard down just because during the day, the delivery was completed, and he delivers her food, which was in perfect condition, while the spirit says nothing. And then the protagonist asks the old lady to enjoy her meal, and Grandma Kim nods, tells him to be careful, and wishes Taehyung all the best too, and the spirit, nonplussed, asks the protagonist how the hell he managed not to drop any of that food, and Tija tells Hela that he's pretty crude for a navigation system, and Hela quickly answers the delivery man, saying that he's a spirit, and asks the protagonist to answer his question now, and Tija answers Hela, saying that he does a bit of Parker sometimes, it's useful during deliveries, and then he starts adjusting his helmet, because he's been bouncing around a lot, and says that he'd like to know what his time was anyway. And the spirit, being a bit reluctant, replies that it was 2 minutes and 53 seconds. And looking at the keychain, Tija is thinking about his time, and Hela says that he can't believe the delivery man managed to make a 10-minute trip in less than 3 minutes. So he makes it clear that if Tija listens to him, until the protagonist simply fiddles with a key ring, causing the bud to come off, and Hela gets scared and asks, with obvious desperation, what the hell Tija is doing, and suddenly, the delivery man gets ready. He simply throws that spirit that was on a keychain upwards, thanking Hela for having warned him. But Hela doesn't understand a thing, asking the delivery man what he thinks he's doing, and tells the protagonist to go and pick up the pieces. And then, the protagonist asks if Hela thinks she can just appear out of nowhere and boss him around. He thinks it's extremely stupid and starts wiping his hands, before getting on his motorcycle again. Then he goes to the Chinese food restaurant, the Wok brothers, and then, smiling, he calls Taehyung and tells him that he'll never guess what just happened, and he comments that he set a new record today, but he stops talking because he sees something that makes him go wide-eyed. He shouts Taehyung's name as he falls to the ground, and quickly, he tries to get Taehyung up and takes out his smartphone, dialing 911, and after being answered, he asks for an ambulance to come immediately, and after calling for an ambulance, he starts shouting Taehyung's name, asking him to wake up soon. The scene then shifts to the general hospital, and the protagonist is taken aback by the cost. The doctors tell him that the cost of Taehyung's treatment will be $3,000. Leaving him completely shocked. While he is incredulous and open-mouthed, the receptionist explains that Taehyung has developed immunity to the current medication he is taking, and they will have to start a new treatment for him. And the protagonist says he doesn't think he has any other options, and the receptionist says that unfortunately, the protagonist is behind with his payments, and the hospital is afraid that he'll end up in debt before he starts the new treatment. They'll give him until the weekend. And at that moment, the delivery man frowns, whispering that he'd already reminded him so many times, and then he says he understands and apologizes. And he's still in that hospital, sitting in a red chair. He wonders how he could get this money, because for something that needs to be done immediately, he doesn't have time to raise it, and he asks himself if he should sell his motorcycle for it, until one person simply asks the protagonist, saying that he has heard that he needs money, and he replies that he does. And the person asks how much it would be, and he replies that it would be about $3,000. And the red-haired girl simply appears next to him, and then she says hello to him, and Tija, a little confused, asks if he knows that girl, and the red-haired girl, smiling in a very sweet way, asks him if he's forgotten about her. But she doesn't make sense of Tija, saying that it makes sense, because he tossed her aside as if she were nothing, and he wonders who she's talking about, and also asks if she's talking about him. He didn't understand that the red-haired girl was Hela, and he'll look in his pocket, saying that the only thing he threw away today was that key ring, which left him completely surprised because the key ring was with him, and he wanted to understand how it got there. Just then, the red-haired girl, smiling, catches Tija's eye and asks him to get down on his knees, and the boy is visibly uncomfortable hearing her say that and asks what the hell she's talking about, and she asks if she's sure he needs money, and she doesn't stop smiling for a second, and she says that if he wants it, he should get down on his knees and beg for it, calling him a bastard. And for a moment, Tija stares at that red-haired girl, and then he says that everything is all right and she owes him $3,000, and the girl answers the delivery man, saying that yes, now he understands, and then he gets up and the girl tells him that he's in luck because she's feeling generous, so he should get down on his knees right away and beg. However, the delivery man simply holds out his hand and tells her to send his $3,000, and the red-haired girl gets angry, asking the delivery man if that's what he calls begging. And at that moment, Tija asks the girl why he needs to beg, and she's confused and asks if he's really having this genuine doubt, or is it a joke with her face, and he says why? He's asking for a favor. And that's it. And in this, the protagonist tells that girl that he earned that money fair and square, and he also asks if there isn't some spiritual law that requires her to keep her promises, because he remembers reading about it when he was a child, and he asks if she doesn't disappear or something without lying. He approaches her and tells her that she said it herself, but he got there in 2 minutes and 53 seconds. 2 minutes less than the 5 minutes she had proposed, and he thinks they could round it up and say it was 3 minutes. That's $1,000 for meeting the 5-minute deadline, and another $1,000 for every minute he saved from then on. So, in total, it's $3,000. And Hela gets very angry, saying that she's understood and will pay him back, and he thanks her for it. And Hela says that he's very boring, and she has no idea how Sloane can't understand that, and the protagonist asks her what she means by Sloane. However, the red-haired girl answers him quite directly, so that he forgets that, and asks him how he wants that money, and the delivery man gets a little pensive at that moment. He asks her if she understands and says that there's always been something he's wanted to try. Then the scene changes to two girls who don't understand anything and ask what it's all about. There was a pile of money in front of them, which the protagonist put down, and with a smile on his face, he tells them he's going to pay them in cash, and he asks them if they could tell him just so he can be sure he has the full amount. And then Hela asks the biker why he asked for the money in notes, and he answers her with another question, asking why he couldn't do that. And Hela says to the protagonist that it seems he did it just to annoy her. She thinks he certainly looked very happy, seeing them counting those money notes, and Tija answers the spirit, saying he wasn't going to lie to her, and he really did enjoy it, and he just wanted to pay for something with his head held high for the first time. And she asks if it really was the first time, and the protagonist answers her, saying that he's tired of tiptoeing around the hospital, because everyone knows he's behind with his payments. And Hela doesn't think she can see that vibe in him at all. And then Tija asks what he would do now, and asks if she's going to take him to meet her supervisor. And Hela asks about the supervisor, and she says she doesn't know what he's talking about. And Tija responds, asking her not to play dumb, and says that she's definitely not the type of person to crawl away after being tossed aside like that. At least, he doesn't believe it's by her choice, and he wonders if it's right that someone sent her to him, as she herself had said Sloane's name, or whoever it was. He thinks that delivery from before was just a test, and at that moment, the red-haired girl asks him why he insists on being a delivery man, because she thinks he'd be a great spy, and Tija's answer is that he still wants to continue working with his brother, and he can't force him to stop working, and he'll work too hard if the protagonist isn't by his side. He thinks it's the only way to make a living and keep an eye on him. What's more, he likes working with him, and from time to time they end up having a few problems. But it's much better for them to be together than apart. Just then, the red-haired girl says that she can see why Sloane chose him, and at that moment, Tija quickly asks her who Sloane is. And Hela tells him to check the supply closet in his restaurant, and Tija can't understand the relationship between the answer she's just given, until suddenly, she simply advances on the protagonist, grabbing his expiration date while it's on fire, and being quite rude and out of patience. She tells the delivery man to just do as she says, and she warns him that if he throws her keychain like that again, she'll kill him. As the fire got higher and higher, she said that she was getting really tired of his attitude, and made it clear that he shouldn't keep testing her patience. And the protagonist protected himself from the fire, until the fire goes out completely. Only a small spark remains, and Tija, really impressed, comments that she's a really nice person, and now he's seeing that he really is a spirit. He then opens the door to his restaurant. He enters and goes to where she had told him to go. As he walked along, he thought that she had given him the money, so he should do as she said, and he told himself that he couldn't tell, but maybe she had left him a present or something, until he comes down the stairs and stares wide-eyed at something with a very bright light in front of him. It was like a huge blue portal, and he asked what was happening there. He approaches that blue portal and tries to touch it, and suddenly, the portal begins to pull him in, and he doesn't understand a thing, until suddenly, his body enters that portal completely, disappearing from that place. After he comes out the other side, he screams a lot, and after a moment, he takes a nasty tumble. He turns upside down, but what he sees leaves him with a feeling of doubt. There was an old man right in front of him with long hair and a long beard, and he welcomed Tija, who didn't understand a thing. And then he asks the old man where he is. And the old man tells him that it's really nice to meet him. And the old man already knew that his name was Tija, and being very polite, he asks the delivery man why he doesn't sit down, and the protagonist tells him that he's clearly going to do that and quickly gets up from the floor. Confused, he asks the old man who he is, and the old man says that his name is Sloane, and he imagines that the protagonist could call him the janitor of the kingdoms. And Tija doesn't quite understand what he means by kingdoms, so he wonders if he's talking like Laird of the Rings or something, and Sloane explains that that's one way of putting it, and he explains to Tija that even if only a small percentage of the kingdom is like this. And while the old man was explaining, the protagonist wondered if the old man had just read his thoughts. But something frustrates Sloane. He tells the protagonist that he doesn't seem shocked by any of this, and asks if he can find out why, and Tija, a little pensive, he explains that then, today he saw a keyring catch fire, ideogram windows began to appear before his eyes. He completed the mission, and also, he saw a rude spirit disappear in a burst of flames. He's feeling a bit blasé about meeting an old man, at least that's what he thinks. And the old man answers Tija, saying that that should be enough, and he starts laughing, thinking it's funny, while the delivery man doesn't say anything at the moment. Sloane pulls himself together and asks if Tija would mind if he went straight to what he had to say, and the delivery man, being quite frank, says that he would actually prefer that, and Sloane says he'd like to do business with the Walk brothers, and Tija gets curious after he says he'd like to do business, and then he pulls at his beard, as if it were some kind of mania he has, and says that he would like to propose a contract that would be beneficial to both of them, and the protagonist, being short and blunt, replies that he wants $5,000. Interrupting what Sloane was saying, he approaches Sloane, and tells him that he wants $5,000 for every delivery he makes. And also, he wants a new motorcycle. He wants detailed information about any place where he makes a delivery, and if he has to travel to any dangerous region, he wants to receive compensation for danger, and of course, Sloane will be responsible for compensating him for any injury or death that occurs on the job. And the old man, obviously, gets quite scared, and asks him if that's all. And then Tija sits down and answers Sloane, saying that for the time being, yes. And the old man gets a doubtful look on his face and asks what he meant by for the time being. And Tija thinks that it looks like he could have asked a lot more of him. And then he asks the old man if they could start negotiations officially. And holding out his hand, he asks the old man what he knows about the protagonist. They were in a little wooden house that looked very cozy, and the old man was sweating. He seemed a bit nervous, and then he asks the protagonist why he suddenly changed his mind. Because Tija was very enthusiastic just now, and the delivery man replies that it seems very dangerous. So he doesn't think he can do it, and besides, he just doesn't understand. And the old man asks him what he still doesn't understand, and the biker asks why he should sign a contract with a normal restaurant like his and his brother's, and asks if it wouldn't be better to go to a more elegant and famous restaurant. And Sloan answers him, saying that he already has a separate supplier for hot cuisine. So he thinks the delivery man might say that signing a contract with a place like his gives their customers more variety. And the protagonist asks the old man if he's saying he'll go to them, because they're pretty decent for a cheap place. And the old man, a little uncomfortable with all this talk, answers the delivery man, saying that there's no point in trying to give the consumer exactly what they want. It's better to simply give them plenty of options so they can decide. But good food is always a great help, and Tija, along with his brother, make the best noodles he's had in a long time. And the protagonist is surprised to hear the old man say that it's the best, and asks which other noodle restaurants he's tried. And the old man replies that he's been to every noodle restaurant in the world, and the protagonist stands in shock, wide-eyed, wondering how that old man managed to go to all the noodle restaurants in the world. And while he was amazed, the old man comments that the gods of the other kingdoms won't settle for anything less than the best, calling Tija a boy. And at that moment, the protagonist begins to wonder what that old man meant by gods, and wonders if he's saying what he's really thinking, that it would be something like Thor or Odin. And the old man comments that yes, when he has the opportunity to try the Wok brothers' food. They've spoken well of it to others, and soon, everyone will want to order from the Wok brothers. And a little incredulously, the protagonist asks if the gods eat things like noodles. And Sloan answers the boy, saying that he should be grateful, because these gods would be passionate about food, not war. And then he asks the protagonist what he thinks about it. And Tija gets pensive, and then he tells the old man that they can do business if they close for 10,000. And the old man is incredulous, asking if the delivery man wants to receive $10,000 per delivery. And at that very moment, the protagonist asks Sloan if he's sure they're not talking about any delivery, and he explains the amount charged, saying that the other realms are full of spirits and other creatures. And obviously the old man doesn't disagree with him, and he asks if there are any magicians who can summon asteroids, and asks the old man what he thinks of a knight who can discover mountains that I am a sword. He says that they are rare, but they do exist. And then, on cue, he asks Sloan if there are dragons too, because he thinks it wouldn't be a fantasy without dragons. And explaining its value, he said that it sounds like a perfect place for a normal human like him to be killed easily and quickly. And the old man answers the boy, saying that he has some measures against this. And obviously, as a negotiator who has traveled all over the world, he is aware that 10,000 is very expensive. And then the delivery man asks Sloan what kind of countermeasures, and the old man, smiling as if it were the best solution in the world, tells the boy that he will provide him with protective items to keep him safe. And the protagonist thinks for a moment about the fact that he just said he would give him items to keep him safe. And then he stands up, puts his hands on the table, and asks that old man, who is a good negotiator, if he could see these items. And quickly, the old man gets up from his chair, not so fast, but willingly, and tells the protagonist that he can clearly show him, and asks the delivery man to accompany him. And Tija says he's very curious, and as they walk together, Sloan tells Tija that he's sure the boy won't be disappointed, and informs him that they are legendary and unique items, fit for the gods, and they are also very light and useful. And at that moment, the protagonist wonders what they are, until they arrive at the place, and the old man, with a smile on his face, pulls out a blue blanket, and it only shows a metal delivery box on a map. And Tija, seeing those items, is incredulous in a very negative way, and he says, pretending to be surprised, that they certainly come in handy. And Sloan asks him to be so, and asks why the protagonist doesn't give the delivery box a ring. And then the boy does as the old man said. Suddenly, a huge system panel appears, leaving the delivery man surprised and open-mouthed. That's the Dionysus delivery box. This delivery box was created by Hephaestus at the request of Dionysus, and is the perfect item for delivery workers, and it comes with hidden abilities that can be unlocked at each delivery milestone. And at that moment Tija wonders about Dionysus, and Hephaestus he wonders if he really is like the ancient Greek gods. And the box shows that the successful deliveries so far have been 0, and it shows the effect item information. Subspace, anything can be stored in this subspace. The items in the subspace will never spoil or spill, and the effect of the item, the indestructible box, is that it is immune to all physical and magical attacks, and also, the effect of the item, the all-seeing flashlight. The case can be used as a light. The brightness level is adjustable, just like a smartphone, and the brightest setting is 10,000 lumens, which is not enough. Seeing this, and a little frustrated because he was expecting more, Tija thinks it's good and so on, but he wonders if a delivery box needs all these powers. And then the old man, a little excited because he thought there was a little more hope for the boy, asks him what he thinks, and also says that the flashlight is customizable, so he makes it clear that Tija can change the color of the light however he wants. And the protagonist answers him a little awkwardly that he thinks it's cool, and it seems that the box also has an input port to be a USB charger. And at the same time as he was saying this to the old man, he thinks that the box is full of unnecessary features, and Sloan, disappointed, practically with a tear falling from his eye, says that it's okay, and they'll see the next item. And it seems that the old man was disappointed because the boy doesn't really appreciate USB charging ports. And the protagonist says that it's okay, showing a little more enthusiasm, but he realizes that he had forgotten that the old man can read his thought. And then, the old man shows the map. It's an unknown map, and Sloan explains to the protagonist that he can be teleported to any location on this map by pressing the dots that light up. When he receives an order, the location of the booth will light up, and when he starts his delivery, the location of the customer will light up. And Tija, surprised, tells the old man that this is a great item for delivery boys, and the old man agrees with him. And now Sloan says they're going back to the contract part. However, Tija says no. Before that, he picks up the delivery box and says that he understands that this delivery box comes with a lot of features, but there's a catch. And Sloan asks the boy what that would be. At this, Tija answers the old man, saying that all these resources are there to keep the box safe, not to keep him safe. And he gives more reasons, asking if he gets caught in a forest fire, or lost in rough waters at sea, he could be hit by a magical attack that he can't even see coming. And he asks if the old man wants him to dive headfirst into this with nothing but a map. He really wanted to know if what matters is keeping the food safe, and he makes it clear that that's not enough for him, as he's just an ordinary human with no special powers. And he asks if the old man has any other measures to ensure his safety, and the old man says that the protagonist thinks ahead. However, he says it's all right, and he's going to offer the delivery man more, and he wonders if that's what the protagonist wants, while Tija stares at the old man with a smile on his face. And then, smiling widely and with flushed cheeks, he says to the old man, "It's a pleasure to do business with you," and showing a blue sword with gold details. Sloan believes that this should be enough to keep Tija safe. He also provides a ring, which is called the Anger of Auranos. That ring contains the anger of the ancient god, Auranos. The effect of the item is mana absorption. It absorbs magic of all kinds. When the absorption limit has been reached, the magic inside will be destroyed. The absorbed magic is reusable. However, the effects of the ring depend on the will of the wearer. The sword, on the other hand, is called the Orphan Sword. The sword was forged by Hephaestus for Ares to be used in battle. After completion, Zeus discovered that it was commissioned for use in slaughter. Ares never received the sword, and the sword waited in the blacksmith's house for its owner to claim it. The effect of the item is the will of Hephaestus, that Nina will never break or rust. It cannot be used by anyone other than Ares, Hephaestus, or those who have his permission. This blade can cut anything. However, the power of the blade depends on the will of who is the door. And Tija asks the old man what this will is that keeps being mentioned, and Sloan answers the boy, saying that he can think of it as imagination. He explains that these items will be as resistant as the delivery man can imagine, and it is a measure taken in practice to prevent him from abusing his powers. Then Sloan makes it clear that he will not accept complaints, and Teja replies, saying that he understood, and then wonders if he should be happy with these items now. And then the old man, quite happy, asks if he'd like to take a look at the contract now, and the protagonist says that it's fine with him. Then, after they've returned to the table, the old man has his head on the table, very upset, and he asks if the delivery man is happy now, and Teja replies to Sloan that he knows very well what he says in simple contracts are the best. Sloan was impatient because the boy was reading line by line, and at that, he asks the deliveryman if it isn't the opposite, and the protagonist, having heard him say that, asks him if they should go back and see what they can add, and with desperation in his voice, Sloan says no, and the protagonist is right. Simple is best. He literally changed his mind very quickly, and then the boy takes that hairy old man's hands in his, saying that he's looking forward to working with him, and the old man answers him, saying that he really felt it. Then the protagonist asks where they should keep the contract, and Sloan says he could leave it there, until suddenly, the contract disappeared from his hand, transforming itself and wrapping itself around his wrist, leaving him surprised and in a state of alert at that moment. And he comments to the old man that this was incredible, and the old man says that now he doesn't have to worry about losing this contract or damaging it, because it had basically become a bracelet. And he makes it clear to the boy that he already has the first delivery booked, and the delivery man can check the details on the map. And Teja thanks Sloan for that, and then he tells the old man not to go anywhere while he's cooking, because there's still something he needs from Sloan, and frustrated, the hairy old man wonders how that could be possible, and the boy, entering the portal, tells the old man that he hasn't given him a new motorcycle yet, and makes it clear that he's going to see the old man soon. And Sloan tells the boy that he has the map, so he wanted to understand why he needed a motorcycle, and Teja answers him quickly, explaining that he can't trust what will happen if he uses the map, and besides, there won't be a proper delivery without his motorcycle. And the old man replies, saying that he understands, and at the same time, he wonders if that's all there is to it. And then the protagonist says he'll come back after he's finished cooking, and the old man puts his hand on his face and says to himself that he thinks he might end up regretting it. Then the young protagonist was in the kitchen that he has with his brother, until he has a shock of reality, and then he sat down on the step of the stairs. He was crestfallen at that moment. He sighs and starts to shake. He asked himself if he had made the right choice, and he thinks he's lucky that the old man wanted to do business with him, and he thinks that was a bit scary. And at that, he picks up the map, and tells himself that refusing his offer altogether was probably the best option. But since that's not possible, he went to take a look. He sees that Lady Selena, Count Bensley's daughter, has ordered 2 bowls of fried noodles, and the remaining time is 1 hour. And at that moment, he keeps thinking about the Count's name. He thinks Bensley is a strange name. Then the scene changes to a kingdom, and there were some people in the street, walking around, and one woman asked another that there was a strange rumor going around. The scene quickly changes to a young man asking someone else if they'd heard about it, and the person replies that this man hears rumors every day, so he'd like to know what's so special about it. While a blonde girl passes behind the man, she walked past a blue rosary, until she arrives where the man in charge was sitting on the throne, walking under the red carpet. When she gets close to the throne, she kneels down and the man asks her what they are gossiping about now, and the blonde woman, wearing a white mask, tells her master that she's getting straight to the point, and he says there's a rumor that Count Bensley will be murdered by someone wearing the Ring of Courage. The scene then switches to Teja with a glass bowl in his hands, containing purple onions, spring onions, carrots, and cucumbers, and he was happy, saying that it's very good that the order is simple, at which point he started preparing the ingredients and began wiping with the white cloth, until he hears a noise that catches his attention and leaves him with a feeling of doubt, and then his brother appears, with a smile on his face, and apologizes, but he thinks that his brother, Teja, is in his place, and Teja is surprised to see Taehyung. And then he asks his brother if the hospital has let him go, and Taehyung says yes, as long as he's feeling better. They didn't see a problem and preferred to let him go, and besides, he still needs to prepare for tomorrow, and a little suspiciously, The delivery man asks Taehyung if he's sure he's okay and also asks if he shouldn't rest more. But Taehyung answers his brother with a smile on his face, as if to reassure him that he's already said he's fine, and the biker sits down, says that this is a relief and asks if he can talk to his brother for a second. And the boy is surprised, asking the protagonist what he wanted to talk about. At this, Taeja shows the contract, which said that Sloan, known as the employer, and Taeja, known as the employee, will agree to the following terms of this employment contract. The employee is entitled to fair compensation from the employer after each completed delivery. The employee will be allowed to travel freely between realms once the contract comes into effect. The employee's job is to deliver food to customers in other realms. The employer must exchange the payment the customers give the employee for $5,000 on Earth to exchange items purchased in other realms for money or take them for use in their own realm. The employee must first seek the employer's permission. The employer can terminate the employee for failure to deliver. The employee is also free to refuse any order. However, they are required to complete a minimum of 1 delivery per day. The contract is also not time specific and will be void if the employee dies, or a mutual agreement is reached between the employer and the employee. And at that moment, Taehyung says there's no way this is happening. He asks if he's sure this is all a big joke, and even if it isn't, he asks his brother if he couldn't have just said no and slid the contract over to Taeja, and the protagonist replies that it was just instinct, but Sloan would have made him sign it somehow. And Taehyung, after hearing him say it, asks what that means, and the protagonist answers his brother, saying that the old man has had them as an album since the beginning. They had found him even after he tried to waste them, and now they have even connected the supply closet they both have to their kingdom. And after hearing this, the boy is astonished, asking what he just said, and asks if he really talked about their supply closet, and he thinks it's crazy. And at that moment, Taeja tells his brother that he then thought about negotiating the best possible terms, if he had to do it anyway, and he apologizes to his brother, because he jumped the gun and did it without his permission. But hearing him say that, Taehyung starts shaking his head to and fro, denying it and telling Taeja that he's always had a good brain for these things, and he trusts his brother's judgment. But there's a catch. He asks the delivery man why the two of them were chosen for this. After all, for Taehyung, there are millions of restaurants just like theirs, and Taeja answers his brother, a little frustrated, and that's what he'd like to know, and banging his head on the table. The protagonist tells his brother that they'll take it as a compliment. After all, Taehyung graduated top of his class from culinary school, and he's the best delivery driver in the country. And his brother answers the protagonist, saying that he's worried because that kind of money must come with some consequence. And while Taeja drooled on the table, his brother said that he still couldn't believe it, or rather, he just couldn't understand it. And the biker answered his brother, saying that he didn't either, and he didn't think anyone would. And at that moment, he touched the contract. It starts to wrap around his wrist again, like a bracelet, and Taehyung is very surprised, wide-eyed and open-mouthed, while Taeja says that he's trying to get used to doing this all day, and his brother raises his voice, showing his surprise, saying that the contract has turned into a bracelet. But he asks the delivery man if he doesn't think this contract gives Sloan too much power, and still with his face under the table, Taeja replies, saying that's why he added that line about being able to refuse orders, and Taehyung asks if it's right that he had mentioned an extra item that he should receive, and asks if he won't show up. And the delivery man answers his brother, saying that he had thought of that too. And then he shows the audio to Taehyung, in which he says that the old man hasn't given him his motorcycle yet, and the old man says that he has a map. So he asks why he needs to give him a motorcycle, and Taeja answers Sloan, saying that it won't look like a proper delivery without his motorcycle, and the old man replies that he understood. Taehyung, a little surprised, asks his brother if he had recorded everything, and Taeja explains that he had turned on the recorder before he went to that kingdom, and he makes it clear to Taehyung that he can't put all his faith in writing, and his brother wonders if Sloan regrets hiring them, and Taeja says that it would be a good sign for them. So he asks his brother if he can cook now, and Taehyung tells his brother that he clearly can. Then the scene changed to two beautiful plates, which had hard-boiled eggs inside, and the protagonist picks up the made dishes and opens the delivery box, while he's putting in the made dishes. He tells his brother that it looks like a black hole, and Tae-hyung answers his brother, saying that he's right and it's really fascinating. And then the protagonist says that he's leaving, and his brother asks if the gate is in the basement, and the protagonist answers him, saying yes, and asks me if he wants to see it. And they go down to the basement together, and Tae-hyung is surprised to see that huge portal, and he says that it's real, and Tae-ja makes it clear to his brother that he shouldn't touch it, because he thinks it's a bit rude. And at that moment, the protagonist says that everything is fine, so he's going out for real now, and his brother says that everything is fine and asks him to be careful out there, and then Tae-ja simply disappears into the glare, while his brother stands there alone. He was a little apprehensive at the time, and he tells his brother to be very careful. Then, suddenly, Tae-ja appears in Sloane's wooden house, as if he had Goku's teleport. At that moment, he looked doubtful, saying that the portal hadn't launched him like before, it seemed to have caught his foot somewhere. And then Hela says that the protagonist is there, and then the protagonist is very direct with her, asking where Mr. Sloane is, and says that he needs to talk to him. And Hela asks Tae-ja if he wants to talk about his motorcycle, and he says it's right there, but he doesn't understand. Then he looks in the direction where the motorcycle is. It was a white scooter, and she explains that it's magic, but it needs a bit of work and should work fine after a few repairs. And then the protagonist, seeing that scooter, sighs and says that he could just walk, and Hela catches his eye, saying that this scooter still has years of useful life left in it. And the boy doesn't quite understand, and asks the red-haired girl why she's getting upset, and showing her irritation, she raises her voice at Tae-ja and tells him not to judge a book by its cover, calling him an idiot, until the protagonist sees something that catches his eye. He looks at the helmet, and he comments that this helmet looks really cool, and Hela thinks it has good eyes, and she thinks the flames on the sides are a great detail. However, Tae-ja found her behavior very strange, and it was already freaking him out, so he asked her why she was acting normal all of a sudden, and he even shuddered at that. And Hela, frustrated, answered the delivery man if that's what she gets for trying to be nice. Tae-ja, not wanting to waste too much time, asks who Count Bensley is anyway, and the red-haired girl asks why he wants to know, and the boy answers her, saying that he's just curious. And Hela asks if he needs to do a background check on all his clients, and Tae-ja is very direct, and answers her, saying that it's not that, but he can't help but be curious. After all, if he's a count, he must be very important. And the red-haired girl, hearing him say this, makes it clear to him that Count Bensley really is important. To put it simply, she explains that she could say that he is more powerful than the king, and Tae-ja is confused, asking if counts are greater than kings, and the girl gets angry, shouting at him, saying no and calling him an idiot, explaining that it's just a figure of speech. And the protagonist says he understood, and she goes on to explain that he has the greatest authority in that kingdom. That's what she meant by stronger than the king. And again, Tae-ja says he understands, curious and also a little annoyed. He asks why the daughter of such a powerful man orders fried noodles. He also wonders if she doesn't have better things to eat. And Hela begins to lose patience with him, to the point of shaking with rage, and with a very rude manner, she answers the protagonist that this is a big conversation for someone who came from a planet where they pay a lot of money to eat snails. And then, out of patience, she tells him to just go and deliver it straight away, telling him to move his legs. And Tae-ja tells her that he will, and asks if he's right, that he just needs to open that map, until he opens it and screams because the glare has affected his eyes, and Hela yells at him to stop complaining and go. Then, suddenly, a flash appears, and then the protagonist was trying to protect his eyes, and wondered if he was really there, at the delivery point, and he sees a beautiful decoration. And then, seeing all the decoration in that place, he tells Hela that he's never seen such an elegant room. And the girl replies that she's the daughter of the man who is superior to the king himself, so it's kind of obvious that her room would be elegant. He looks at the desk, sees several potions and thinks for a moment, and then he asks the spirit what those things are, and asks if they're magic potions, and Hela makes it clear that this is going to look like breaking and entering. And the delivery man explains to her that he's really just taking a look at what's there. But the spirit makes it clear that the protagonist is touching other people's things without permission, and the delivery man, being quite silly, asks if he's doing it, until he tells her it's alright and asks her to let him finish what he has to do there. Then he suddenly shouts that his delivery is there and asks if anyone is home, until he hears a whistle and looks doubtful. He goes to the door, knocks on it, and asks the madam how much, saying that he's there with her delivery, and he tells the red-haired girl that he thinks the madam can't hear him, until he opens the door, saying that he is there with his delivery, and the girl with a towel on her head is confused and doesn't understand anything, while the protagonist is left open-mouthed because he would never have imagined that this would happen. Tija tries to explain that her delivery has arrived, but the blonde girl starts shouting, saying he's crazy. Then, after all that terrible mess, the protagonist delivers the food that the blonde girl had ordered, and she is surprised to see the food on the table, her cheeks flushed. She says that it looks very good, and Tija to the blonde girl, who he's happy to hear, calling her madam, and he had a little blood coming out of his nose from a slap mark on his face. And then the blonde girl asked about him. She wanted to know if it was just him, and if he had any problems getting there, because the spirit is invisible to others. And the protagonist replies to the blonde girl, saying that this is the first time he's been slapped while making a delivery, but other than that, no problem. And he says this smiling at her, and the spirit is surprised, wondering if, then, the protagonist is too soft-spoken, but she believes that going after is his specialty, until the girl excitedly asks the delivery man to wait a little while and asks if there's a problem with the order, if he's forgotten her pickle or something. However, the blonde girl held out her hand, saying that the list of payments was the ring of courage, and smiling, the protagonist takes the ring and thanks madam, and at the same time, he wonders if the ring of courage, which seems to be a bad ring, is worth $5,000. And it's not that it matters to him. All that matters is that he gets paid the way of life. And then the count's daughter tells him that the wing is specific, so he can't lose it, but he doesn't understand very well. And Hela, who is invisible to the others, explains to the protagonist that the girl had told him not to lose the gift because it's precious. And then the count's daughter, speaking very loudly, said that she knew that the Wok brothers' food was special. And at that moment, Tija approaches the spirit and starts whispering, asking if the red-haired girl doesn't think the count's daughter has a screw loose. And Hela replies that she doesn't know, but she certainly looks like it. Then, putting the ring on his finger, he asks the girl if the food is to her liking, and she quickly answers yes, saying that it's the best food she's ever eaten. And Tija, after hearing her say that, says it's okay, and then he leaves, and she replies that it's okay, and they'll see each other soon. And then the protagonist says that everything is fine, and he's going to go home now. Opening the map, he has a tone of doubt. There was an absurd silence at that moment, and he starts turning the map from side to side, wondering what's wrong with the map, because it looks like it's going to be broken. And then, completely in shock, the boy tells Hela that there's something wrong with that thing, and he just wanted to go home. Butch tells him that she doesn't know, until the count's daughter asks what's wrong, and he nods at her and says it's nothing. And then he goes to her door, and tells her to enjoy the rest of her meal, and she tells him that everything is fine, and they'll see each other next time. And then he asks the spirit if she knows where Sloane's cabin is, and he wonders if maybe he could walk. They're a bit nervous, and he starts to sweat, and she says yes, but it'll take him a week to get there, and he's shocked, asking if she's serious. He also asks if he's going to be stuck in this kingdom for the whole week, and he thinks it's a joke, but Hela tells him not to occupy her, until they hear a loud scream, leaving them both wide-eyed, and the protagonist asks what just happened, and the count's daughter screams, saying it's the murderer. She says the murderer is there, and Tija, not understanding anything, with her talking about a murderer, asks what she's trying to say, and Hela wonders if the girl has gone mad, and suddenly, the count's daughter simply changes her countenance, blinking. She apologizes, and asks if she had frightened them, and she says that she knows it's sudden, but she would like to ask him to pretend to be a murderer, and Tija asks if she's joking, and Hela asks the delivery man if they should just kill her. Suddenly, some of the count's soldiers burst in, shouting that they had to capture the murderer. Then he looks over and sees more soldiers arriving, shouting that they are protecting Lady Selena, and Tija realizes that they've simply surrounded him, because Hela is invisible and won't be affected. And then the protagonist wonders if this means he has to kill her, but Hela tries to call him, asking him to wait a bit, and says that she was only joking. and asks if he knows that, until Tija starts to say that they're going to do it. But Hela gets worried, and in desperation, she says again that she was just joking. However, Selena is left with a tone of doubt, or the protagonist moving towards her, and she takes a parchment, saying that then he refuses to come quietly, and the protagonist wonders what it is, and Hela warns him that it's a magic scroll, and he should be careful. Suddenly, fire starts coming out of the parchment. She uses a spell called a fireball, and the protagonist quickly opens the delivery box. The portal quickly appears from that delivery box, while the protagonist is left wondering what the hell that thing is, and Hela tells him that it's coming, and he should hold on tight until the fire starts to die down. And then, with a tone of doubt, Lady Selena wondered if she had managed to catch him, but with a hand soiled by smoke. It was Tija's hand, and he grabs her arm, leaving her in shock, and he apologizes, and he explains that his delivery box is fireproof, and he had tried to kill him with a fireball, so he thinks it's his turn now, and the Count's daughter, extremely shocked by what is happening, shouts, asking if they can talk about it, and the protagonist replies that it's alright, he'll talk, but it won't be with her. And then the scene switches to the blonde girl in the white mask, and she asks the person in front of her what she just said, and the hooded man says that Lady Selena has been taken hostage, and the masked blonde girl replies that their magical seal of protection should have alerted him to any intruders, and the hooded me replies that, as she can see, the alarms simply never went off. And then the woman asks him if he's saying that the seal isn't working, and bowing slightly, the boy replies that he doesn't know how to explain it, calling that blonde woman in the mask his mistress, and he thinks that the intruder has suddenly appeared in Lady Selena's room. And the woman sighs. She gets up and says she'll take care of it herself, and the boy asks his mistress to allow him to accompany her, and the masked blonde says that she won't reveal her true self, but please, she asks him to be prepared for anything, and he tells his mistress yes. And then the scene changed, as he walked up to some soldiers. They hadn't noticed her there, until they were a little startled and offered to do whatever was necessary for Lady Adelia. And I asked if she had been informed of the situation, and she asks if her sister is still with the intruder, and the soldier apologizes to his mistress, and the other soldier says that it seems the magic has no effect on the intruder, and Adelia didn't know what to say at that moment. Then she asks them both if there's any reason why the doors are closed, and one of them explains that the kidnapper demanded that the doors be closed until my negotiator arrived. And hearing them say that, she asks if they then did exactly what he said, and the soldier explains that the kidnapper had threatened to kill Lady Selena with a sword, and they apologize for that. And Adelia is surprised to see that someone has threatened to kill Count Bensley's daughter, and they confirm it. Then she tells them both that she's going to talk to him herself, and they're both shocked, telling her not to do it because it's too dangerous, and Lady Adelia is able to negotiate with him, but the soldier says that they can't allow her in yet, and the other says that they can't let her enter this room alone. However, the girl asks if that's the case, then she should call her father, but they both start shaking and shout no, and ask her to come in soon. She goes to the door and grabs the handle. I'm given to ask her to please give a signal in case something happens, and they'll take care of saving her, but she tells them both that the special forces are ready, so they should be fine, until she enters, and Selena screams for her sister Adelia, crying a lot and asking her to save her. Smiling, Adelia tells her sister that everything is fine and nothing will happen to her. However, the protagonist simply warns Adelia not to take any further steps. Adelia smiles and tells the boy that she came alone. As she said this, some hooded men entered from behind, and the delivery man said that she would also be careful if anyone tried to frame her as a murderer for no reason. And Lady Adelia asks him what he thinks about them starting with introductions, but Tija shouts that he told her not to move, and she continues, not caring. She smiles and says that she is Count Bensley's second daughter, and her name is Adelia, and she is there to negotiate with him. And then she asks what his name is, as the two hooded men slowly approach, and then he asks, why should he say his name, and makes it clear that he has no name to give to scammers like them. Suddenly, Hela catches the delivery man's eye, telling him to be careful because there are two guys after him, and he quickly looks away. And then he goes on to say that he already knew something like this would happen. Just then, Adeli picks up a scroll, and the delivery man asks if it's another magic scroll, and says that he won't be fooled twice, and she knows it. while Hela tells him to be careful because they don't know what kind of magic is in that scroll. And Tija asks her who cares, advancing on Adelia, until a flash appears, but the girl is surprised, and she says that there's no way that could happen. And she asks how the protagonist managed to cut a magic seal. Then the protagonist quickly goes behind her and holds Adelia, and then, relieved, he says that it was a close call, and it's very good that he was ready for that question. And then he tells everyone to stand still, and being threatening, he tells Adelia to tell her men to stop, but she tells the delivery man that they are not her men, and then, the protagonist asks if she's calling him an idiot. After all, they appeared as soon as she entered this room, and Adelia says she's being very honest, and she doesn't know who they are, and only her father knows all the secret passages in this castle. Worried, Lady Selena asks Adelia who these guys are, and Adelia asks Selena not to worry about her, and tells her to take her leftovers and wait outside. The works she was referring to were the food, but Selena is saddened to hear her sister say this, and says that she is now the hostage. And smiling, as if nothing was happening, the blonde girl tells her sister that she's going to be fine, but her sister remains reluctant, until Adelia tells her sister that her father will find out if she keeps kneeling there, leaving Selena on alert. And she goes on to tell Selena to share her meal with a loved one of hers. And Selena, visibly worried, tells her sister that she'll do it. Then she gets up, asking her sister to be careful, while she takes her bowl of food, which the protagonist would have brought. And then Tija tells the hooded men that they can leave too, that they shouldn't force him to cut off their heads, and they start to leave. And then Adelia says that they're alone now, and asks the boy if he'd mind putting down his sword, at which point he asks who she is, and the girl starts walking, and while her back is turned to him, she says that she has already introduced herself, and asks him if he doesn't think it's his turn, and then she turns around, and smiling at him, she calls him Mr. International Kingdom Delivery Boy, and the protagonist is in shock, asking how she knew, and while he was incredulous, the spirit makes it clear to him that he can't trust her. And Adelia tells the protagonist that she knows much more than he expects, and their magical seal of protection wouldn't warn them about intruders from other kingdoms. And Tija looks at Hela, and whispering, asks how she could not know that, and she answers with another question. She asks the protagonist why he expects her to know everything, and he replies that it's because she told him about Count Bensley. And Hela, furious, raises her voice at him, saying that she only knows him from a previous delivery. And at that moment, the protagonist looks at the spirit with that look, and asks if she's ever made a delivery there before, and a little awkwardly, she doesn't quite know what to say to him. And then Adelia asks if the protagonist is a spirit magician, and he doesn't understand, and then he asks her what that is. And she explains that it's someone who communicates with spirits, and she wondered about that, because he just seemed to be talking to empty air. And the protagonist wonders about the spirit wizard, and he's never heard of it. And smiling, Lady Selena's sister says that she doesn't think he knows everything. Not everything, but she'd say he's among the 3 best informed people on this earth. And Tija answers her, saying that anyway, he wanted to know how she could stand there, looking so calm, and asks if she has a death wish or something, and she answers him, asking if he's talking about her, and then he points the sword at her, and she asks how long he plans to keep up this terrible farce. And she asks him if he's sure that he's never killed anyone, and he's surprised by what she's just said. She goes on to say that he's never killed anyone, so there's no point in threatening her, and asks him to sit down and talk to her. And at that moment, the boy picks up his delivery box, telling her to stand up. And Adelia, a little irritated by the situation, asks why she should do what he says, and asks if she had already said that his threats simply fall flat for her, at which point he simply uses his sword, making a cut, and she's surprised, and she asks if he's a swordsman, and the boy asks her not to make him repeat it again, and orders her to stand up unless she wants to end herself. And Adela, hearing him say that, asks him if he's sure he has what it takes to kill someone, and he answers the lady, saying that this isn't even his kingdom, so he could kill her and go home as if nothing had happened. And Adelia sighs for a moment, and wonders if all the international kingdom deliverers are like him. And the protagonist answers with another question. He wants to know if all the aristocrats in this world are like her. And at that moment, Lady Adelia asks him what he wants, and he asks her to take him out of this place. He's going to escape using her as a hostage, and at that moment, she gets up. She goes to the door, opens the handle, and warns him that they will come after him as soon as he leaves the castle. And he says he's going to hold her hostage until they reach a place where he can no longer be traced. And she's anxious to see how this plan works. And the protagonist tells her to just look ahead and keep moving. And then, in the corridor, he shouts at those guards, telling them to get out of his way. Of course, if they don't want to see her head rolling at their feet. The delivery man was very good with threats, and the guards were shocked to see that Lady Adelia had been caught. However, she tries to reassure everyone that she's fine, and they should do everything the delivery man says. But everyone stands there, hesitating, and Tija shouts, saying that he's not joking there, and that they shouldn't tell him later that he hadn't warned them. And then Tija starts walking, while Adelia is in front, and the guard thinks that now is his chance. Then he prepares an attack called Gravity. He ends up hitting the protagonist, who falls to the ground, getting a fright, and at the same time, in a very strange way, Hela also falls, and at that moment, the delivery man asks what's going on, and the spirit explains to him that it's gravitational magic. And at that moment, the guards go up to Adelia and ask if her lady is hurt. They help her up, and the other asks if she's alright. And she replies, saying yes, but she wanted to know about the intruder. And the soldier says that they think they've caught him. And she makes it clear that they should approach the delivery man carefully. And at that moment, the protagonist wonders what he should do, and he thinks that one of the things Sloane had given him must be useful in some way, until Hela shouts at the protagonist to wear the ring, calling him an idiot. And at that moment, he looks at the ring on his finger, and then he answers the spirit, saying that he was about to do it. And the panel shows that Aurano's ring absorbs magic of all kinds, and can reuse absorbed magic. And then, quickly, he uses gravity, and ends up activating Aurano's fury, and everyone is shocked, quickly falling to the ground, and they think it's impossible, not understanding how he managed to copy this spell so easily. And Lady Adelia, seeing this happening, wonders if he has just reflected a magic spell from the sixth circle. And at that moment, the protagonist stands up with a smile on his face, along with the spirit, and smiling. Tija says that that ring works very well, and the delivery box and the sword were also very useful, and Hela agrees with him, saying that all the artifacts in their possession are of divine level. And then, the protagonist asks her if they should try to run, and the count's daughter goes with him, and the rest of them could stay put. And then Adelia asks the protagonist who he is, and Tija answers her, saying that he's just a delivery man, a motorcycle courier, and Lady Adelia tells him that he has the skills of a master swordsman and the power to defeat a sixth circle wizard, and asks if he really chooses to be a delivery boy. But Tija doesn't want to talk to her much and tells her to just keep walking. And then the blonde girl says that everything is fine and the protagonist has won. And at that, the protagonist stared at her, while she said that if he really tells her who he is, she'll put an end to the false accusation. And then he asks her if she really wants to know who he is, and she makes it clear that he shouldn't think about lying to her, because she's already seen that he's a terrible liar. And then he asks her if, in fact, he's a deliverer powerful enough to be a master of the sword and a sixth circle magician. And she gets angry, asking if he's still playing games, and he says not really, and he's telling the truth. And he asks if it looks like he's lying. And then she asks how she can believe that someone like him is just a delivery man, because he's easily showing a lot of strength. And smiling, the protagonist says that he thinks he should also mention something, making her curious and asking him what it is. And he responds by saying that he's considered a pretty typical guy in his own kingdom. And so they continue walking. And Adelia asks Tija what his kingdom is like, and he answers her. He says it's very beautiful, and she asks what the seasons are. He says spring, summer, fall, and winter. And then she asks him what kind of food he eats, and he says rice, seaweed, and kimchi, and she doesn't understand what kimchi is, and asks him what it is. And he says it's just a type of food, and he thinks it's very good, until she asks what kind of creatures live there and asks if his kingdom also has dragons. And about the density of mana, she asks if he would say that it compares with her kingdom. But he gets impatient, raising his tone with her, and asking how he could know, he asks her to stop asking all these questions and asks if she can't keep quiet for a second. And then he whispers to Hela, asking why the hell the map isn't working, and she answers him again that she can't say. And annoyed, he tells the spirit that he had said that all the artifacts were of god level, and he should also check if that sword is a failure. And Hela, frustrated, replies to him that she really doesn't know, and she makes it clear that this sword is certainly not a failure. And then she asks him to let her see his contract, and he asks her why on earth she would want to see his contract, and she gets angry, raising her voice at him, and in a very rude way, she tells him to just hand it over because she wants to check something. And then he snaps his mouth shut, feeling a little uncomfortable, and makes the contract that was in the shape of a bracelet appear, and he tells her that she'd better find something. And then, with the contract in hand, she asks him to take another look and asks if he sees anything strange, and he doesn't understand what she means by strange, so I ask him what it is, and she shows him a small detail, and he asks what it is. And then, with a magnifying glass in hand, she tells him to pick it up, and he thanks her for it, but he still wonders why she's carrying a magnifying glass. While the blonde girl stands in front feeling excluded, the delivery man uses the magnifying glass and wonders what it is, and he sees in the fine print, which every contract has, that the employee must collect all the empty plates, bowls or utensils that were delivered with the food after the customer has finished using them. The map skills will be sealed until all the items have been collected. Makes it clear that this is necessary to protect the natural environments of other kingdoms. And the font size was really tiny, to the point where you had to use a magnifying glass to see it. Completely annoyed, the protagonist asks what the hell that is. He really couldn't believe it, and starts shaking that paper in anger. And Hela says that she really had no way of knowing, seeing the anger he was feeling. She gets worried, and then he asks her how she knew about the hidden clause in the first place, and she visibly frowns, replies that the reason is that she fell for the same trick, and he asks what she's talking about, and a little apprehensively, she says it was nothing. And then Adele turns around and says that she thinks she's found out why he hasn't been able to return to his world, and asks if he still wants to leave this castle. And Hela relieved at that moment that the conversation has turned around, and the protagonist asked Lady Adelia how he could find her sister, but the blonde woman said she wasn't sure where she was. And at that moment, the contract turned back into a bracelet, in the super cool way it always does, and suddenly, the protagonist simply points his sword at the blonde, and she's not afraid of anything, telling him to go ahead and kill her. Clearly, he can kill her if he doesn't need to collect his empty bowls. She's simply been surgical with the protagonist, and he stares at her, and then he says it's all right, and he's going to look for her on his own. And Adelia asks if he really thinks the knights and wizards are going to stand by and let him wander wherever he wants in that castle. And then, as he walks away and leaves her behind, she asks him what he thinks of them making an exchange. If he does her a favor, she returns the bowls, and he denies it and thanks her. And at that, she asks if he doesn't think their full forces have seen him, and if she's not with him, the guards won't let him through, and she asks if he's sure he's okay with that. And Hela tells the protagonist that if her guards from Benzeli show up, it's sure to get messy. It'll be a terrible mess. And the boy remains silent for a moment, and he keeps walking. And the blonde girl is a difficult favor. It's just one she can't handle on her own due to her position. And the spirit tells Tija that maybe it would be better to just accept her offer. And Tija, disgruntled, snaps his mouth, and he thinks there's nothing more that can be done, and he's fine with that. Until someone shouts Adelia's name. It was simply Selena, bowl in hand, and she becomes apprehensive at that moment. And at that moment, the protagonist gets a smile on his face, saying that he sees what has appeared to them. And Adelia is a little embarrassed to see her sister there, and then, the protagonist runs towards Lady Selena to take the bowl from her hand, and the girl becomes alert at that moment. Then Adelia shouts her sister's name, asking her to run immediately, and Selija starts running and screaming a lot, going down the stairs with all the speed she has. The protagonist starts sliding down the banister, and the spirit, coming down the stairs, says that they can't let her escape in any way, and Tija replies that he already knows that. And then the girl goes to a location. She loses them both, and the boy wonders where she's gone. And then Hela points in that direction and says she went there. And there were several guards right in front of them, with the girl with them. And then, rather breathlessly, Adelia says that it's not too late, and he should take her up on her offer and she'll remove the guards. And Hela tells the delivery man that it looks like Adelia might have a heart attack before they close this deal. And the protagonist tells her that he knows about it and asks if she knows. And then, one of the guards shouts, telling everyone else to get into battle position, and the other shouts that they should protect Lady Selena, whatever the cost. And the protagonist, seeing this, says that they're all boring as hell, so he calls them all to come and fight, all at once, and then he starts to put the sword away. And the spirit asks the delivery man why he's returning the sword. After all, it's the only weapon he has, and he replies to Hela, saying that she should be quiet for a minute and he'd be grateful. And then he ran towards those guards, who were holding swords that were emitting some kind of red magic, while a mage was also preparing to attack. And then the protagonist asks Hela to hold on tight, while she holds his jacket, completely desperate and asking what he's planning to do. Then the guard tries to attack him with his sword, but he blocks him using the delivery box, and just after blocking that frontal attack, he kicks the guard, and he screams a lot as he is thrown backwards, and then he falls to the ground with everything, while the other guards don't understand, and one of the guards tells them not to let their guard down and to go ahead and attack. And at that moment, the mages begin to use their magical attacks, an attack called poison, and at that moment, the protagonist suddenly appeared in the middle of the two, thanking them, and the two mages feel as if they've fallen for a trick, saying that he's absorbed the magic they've just used, and then he just hits the guard and the other guard and starts running, saying they're both too slow. And in front of him, there was another guard, who quickly prepared to strike Tija, who quickly dodges, crawling on the ground, and the guard was incredulous, asking what that was, because he had never seen anyone move like that, until, getting ready to kick that guard, Tija explains that it's called Parker, and he's sure that the guard has probably never heard of it, and it hits him with everything, and then 3 more guards go after him. However, he sees Lady Selena running, asking for someone to help her, and the protagonist says that those guards are very annoying, preparing to wear his ring, and then sparks start coming out of that ring. Suddenly, a huge ball of fire shot out of the ring towards the guards, causing them to stop reacting. And Selena, desperate and seeing what Tija was doing to everyone, says that he's simply a monster. There's no way to catalog him as anything else. And at that moment, he ended up appearing in front of her, by the force of the projection of the flames he was releasing with his hands, and smiling. He says hello to Selena and calls her sweetheart, saying that he's there to collect the empty bowls and holds out his hand for her to hand over. And then Selena sees that there's nowhere to run at that moment and holds out her hand, saying that there it is and he can leave now. And Tija smiles at her, thanking her and calling her ma'am. At that moment, Hela, seeing all this, asks again why he works as a delivery man. However, Tija wastes no time and picks up his map, and the map is glowing and very surprised. He says it's working again, and the spirit just tells him to hurry up so they can get back as soon as possible. And then they enter the portal, and he comments that it's been terrible getting to know them all, and he hopes they never see each other again, while smiling and nodding, as if he'd said good things. But when Adelia saw this, she shouted that this couldn't be happening, and after arriving at Sloane's hut, the delivery man tells the spirit that this was more trouble than anything worthwhile. And Hela, after hearing him say this, catches his eye, trying to remind him that this was only his first day, and at that moment, they realize something. Tija has a look of doubt, while Hela wonders why the portal is still there, until a flash happens, leaving the protagonist with even more doubts. And suddenly Adelia falls on top of him, and he ends up hitting his head and moaning a bit in pain, wondering what the hell just happened, until he sees the girl on top of him, and is incredulous and wide-eyed. He asks what the hell she's doing there. With a smile on her face, Adelia asks him where he thinks he's going, and the boy is visibly worried. With his mouth open, he doesn't know what to say, and then the blonde girl asks what kind of shack this is, and she wonders how anyone can live in such a rotten place. And then the guy just says skirt, but she doesn't quite understand and asks him what he's trying to say, until Tija desperately shouts for her to get off him, and the blonde girl stands up, and being quite pretentious, she asks him how he could be so rouge with a delicate girl like her. And after hearing her say this, Tija asks her if she doesn't think it's a bit too late to play the innocent and slaps her clothes in an attempt to dust them off. But Adelia doesn't quite understand and asks what he means by that. And the protagonist, being very direct, says that he thinks there's no point in trying to reason with her. He quickly takes the sword out of his delivery box, and the girl is startled. And then she asks, with her hands to her face, as if she were very frightened, how he could treat her like that. And she asks if she isn't considered beautiful in his world, and the visibly irritated Tija sighs and answers her, saying that her face is the least of her worries. And then, while she's on the floor, she asks him to let her ask again, and she asks what kind of shabby shack this is. And he replies, asking another question, if this is her problem, and Adelia replies that she thought it might be a perfect place to tell her story. Opening the portal, the protagonist turns his back to her, waves and says that he has no interest in her stories, and also says that he will see her soon, and the girl doesn't understand, asking where he is going, and asks him to wait because she has something she needs to tell him. And Tija, being very short and blunt with her, replies that he needs to go home, and he's already said he's not interested, and a little desperate. She asks him about her, and Tija asks why he would care what happens to a stalker. And the girl, visibly apprehensive, says that her maid isn't there, so she doesn't know how she could wash herself, and the place is also dirty and musty. However, Tija doesn't give a damn and wishes her luck by entering the portal, and Adelia stands there, watching the portal crumble, not knowing what to do. And at that moment, she quickly touches the portal, and feels a pain that makes her hand tremble. It's as if she's been shocked, and she's silent for a moment, reflecting, and her countenance shows that she's a little sad, but she tells herself that she won't give up. She can't give up now. All she knows is that he has to make at least one delivery a day, so she's sure he'll be back tomorrow, and she starts mumbling to herself, as if to console herself, that he'll be back tomorrow and everything will be fine. And it was already evening in that hut. And then the scene shifts to the protagonist, who was looking at the kitchen, and he sees his brother lying down. So he calls Taehyung and asks if he's asleep, and then, as he approaches, takes the blanket and puts it on his brother. He comments to himself that he doesn't know why he turns around so much. And after that, he sits on the floor, leaning on the stove, and he sighs, saying he's exhausted. And then he catches his brother's eye, asking him to guess what happened to him today, and comments that people in other kingdoms really do use swords and magic. And he also says that there were all these knights, which he'd only seen in movies, and even someone who could gravity. He also comments that they were throwing fireballs at him, and he thought he was going to end up as a barbecue. But the delivery box was super resistant and ended up saving him. Somehow, he managed to make the delivery and even got a ring. Now he just needs to get paid, and he makes it clear to his brother that they can now go to the hospital whenever he needs them. But while he was talking, Taehyung was snoring, and then Tija says goodnight to his brother, leaning over. And at that moment, he began to tremble. Then tomorrow comes, and the protagonist said goodbye to his brother, and Taehyung wished him luck and asked him to be careful. And smiling, Tija tells his brother that it's peaceful in the other kingdoms, so he shouldn't worry, until he enters and the flash appears, and Taehyung stands there, alone, and he says that his brother is a liar. He squeezes your hand very tightly. He starts to climb the stairs, and tells himself that he can't rely on his brother forever, and he has to figure out what he can do on his own. And then he puts his hand on the wall. Feeling very elegant, he asks himself if there really is anything he can do on his own, until he hears someone denying it, saying that at least, not alone, and he gets very scared. With a desperation that is completely palpable, he asks who is there, and the person says that with help, anything is possible, and ask him what he thinks. He asks if Taehyung would like to make a deal with him. He then moves on to the old man's hut, where the protagonist has just arrived, and he is stretching at that moment, saying that he is feeling stiff and tired, until he sees the blonde girl standing there, and looks doubtful. Then Adelia quickly gets up and says she was waiting for him, calling him Mr. Deliveryman, and Tija looks doubtful at her calling him Mr. Deliveryman, and practically crawling away, with flushed cheeks and a smile on her face, trying to be graceful. She tells Tija that she calls him that because he has never spoken his name to her, and the protagonist answers her quite directly that he never intends to tell her and asks her what she wants. In desperation, she asks him to accept her as his partner, and the delivery man doesn't quite understand what she means by that, and the spirit next to him asks what the hell she's talking about so early in the morning. And the girl, who seemed to be visibly desperate, says that she's sure he doesn't know much about the lands he'll be traveling to, and she can give him information about culture, the environment, the economy, or anything else he needs to know. And Hela asks the delivery man if she's missed anything, and also asks what she's talking about, and the boy replies that he has no idea, and she only demanded that he accept her as his companion as soon as he set foot there. And Hela asks why she would be a companion, and Tija asks Lady Adelia who she is exactly, and the blonde girl answers the protagonist, saying that she hopes he can keep it a secret from everyone else, and he says he won't, and she explains that their father, Count Bensley, is a man with a thirst for power, and he doesn't trust anyone either, which is why he founded an establishment dedicated to collecting all the information that travels across the continent, and this organization is known as Shadow, and she is currently the leader of the organization. The protagonist is surprised by the name, and says it's a very weak name, while the spirit sitting on his shoulder comments that Shadow is the largest intelligence agency on the continent, and that it has more to offer than she imagined. And then Lady Adelia tells the boy that she thinks she proved her worth when she recognized that he was from another kingdom. But the boy thinks that makes it even more suspicious that someone like her wants to be his companion, and she explains that she wants to collect some objective information from him, calling him a delivery man again. And smiling, he asks if being his companion won't make her prejudiced, and the blonde girl, smiling, answers the boy, saying that she has been head of this organization for 10 years and she is able to look at personal issues objectively. And the surprised Tija asks about the 10 years, and at the same time, he thinks that she doesn't look a day over 20, and then he answers her, saying that everything is fine with him, and she's in shock, wondering if he's serious. In desperation, she thanks him, promising that he won't regret it, but Tija simply cuts off the conversation, saying that she should only answer his questions. At this, Hela asks what he's getting into, and he answers the spirit, saying that he'll pretend to agree for now and then get rid of her later. And Hela asks what he means by that, but he tells her not to worry, and the blonde girl, smiling and with a scroll in her hand, says that they'll go back to her land after they've made the delivery. And the boy is a little doubtful at that moment, asking if she couldn't have used that scroll to get home, and she explains that she only has one, so she wanted to wait for him so they could go together. And the protagonist thinks she's an idiot, and then they entered the portal. She had opened the scroll, and the flash was absurd, and the boy comments that he can't get used to all that glare on his face. And the spirit asks him if he doesn't think it's about time he got over it, and he was in a place where there were a lot of people. The delivery man asks why there are so many people there, and Adelia is wide-eyed and open-mouthed, completely surprised. And then the boy asks the blonde what's wrong, and she points in a direction, and there was her sister kneeling and a boy to her left, with a man with a huge sword. Her sister would be killed. Trembling badly, Lady Adelia shouts for her sister, Selena, and stuttering and trembling a lot, Lady Selena tells her father that that man is innocent, and she is the one behind all this. So she asks him please, and thinks she is the only one who deserves to die. In desperation, the boy tells Count Bensley that Lady Selena is his daughter, and that he had planned the murder all by himself. He asks him to please spare her, but he is interrupted when the man kicks him, making him groan in pain, and then the scene cuts back a little, with Selena going up to the boy, who is called Apicius, and he is surprised to see her, and she asks him to give her a ring, and he tells her no, it could put her in danger. However, the girl answers him, saying that everything is fine, and she has a plan to keep them both safe. She explains that she has found a scapegoat to take this ring and the blame for everything, and Apicius comments that he can't let an innocent person take the blame for it. But the girl makes it clear that he is from another world, so it should be fine, and the man, in the present moment, tells Apicius that he's too noisy for a criminal, and starts kicking him a lot, and the boy just moans in pain. And Selena gets desperate and orders him to stop it. She orders him again to stop kicking him right now and asks him if he heard her talking. And Bensley says that's enough. And at that moment, the girl, her eyes full of tears, asks the boy next to her if he's all right, and he replies that he is. With a little blood on his lips, he apologizes for not having protected her, calling her his mistress and saying that he is not worthy of her sacrifice. And Selena yells at him, asking what he is saying, and makes it clear that he is everything to her. Tija asks the blonde next to him if that isn't her sister. He asks Adelia what the hell is going on, and she replies sheepishly that she's not really sure, and they should, until her conversation is interrupted by Count Benzaly shouting for their heads to be cut off. And at that moment, the man with the sword prepares himself, while Selena begins to tremble, and Apicius thanks her for everything, and soon, they will come together. They will be together in death, just as they were in life. And Tija comments that it looks like they're really going to kill her, and asks if they shouldn't try to stop them. While Hela says that she wouldn't expect anything less from Ben says that she wouldn't expect anything less from Benzaly. The blonde tells her that they need to analyze the situation properly first, but the delivery man shouts at her, saying that there's no time for all this, and just as the man brings his sword down, Adelia shouts at him to stop, and the sword came very close to Lady Selena, who had her head down, and Tija and Adelia stare at that moment, and then the comments began, with people wondering who that was, and also wondering if that wasn't Lady Adelia standing next to that man. He also commented that they've heard that she's disappeared, and they think they've just found her. The whispering hasn't stopped, and people think it sounds like she's been through a difficult time. And then Adelia's father, Count Benzaly, asks her what that was all about, and also asks what she's doing there, and comments that they've been looking for her everywhere, and the blonde doesn't know what to say to her father. She tries to find words, and thinks that all she has to do is say something to make her father fall in love, and she needs to stay calm, because with the right answer, she can save both their lives. And then the protagonist says that the two of them are innocent, taking Adelia by surprise, and she calls the protagonist with a tone of doubt, and Tija continues, saying that's why it's wrong of the Count to kill them, and Adelia becomes desperate, saying that he shouldn't speak so rudely to her father, and Tija looks at her and says that she should join in too, she can't lose her nerve there, and she answers him, saying that the problem is that he doesn't know anything about her father. Count Benzaly asks the boy who he is, at which point the boy asks him to let him introduce himself, and he says that he is an international courier of kingdoms, and he hopes that this will be enough to prove that he is, by showing his delivery box, and the guards are outraged, asking how the protagonist can talk to the Count like that. They think he should get down on his knees and pay respects, but Count Benzaly says that it's actually okay, and the Count continues, saying that he understands who Tija is, but he asks what makes him question his judgment, and the protagonist asks the Count what makes him so sure that these two are guilty, and the calm replies that he received news a short while ago that someone with the Ring of Courage was going to assassinate him. In response to the threat, he reinforced the castle's defenses and caught the intruder, who was also wearing the Ring of Courage. He explains that Selena is guilty of having met the intruder in secret and of trying to help him escape from his cell. These two were sentenced to death for conspiracy and attempted murder, and the delivery man answers the Count, saying that this is strange, as he had also entered his castle yesterday, and he goes on to say that it's not just that. Smiling, he says he's the one with the Ring of Courage, and feigning surprise, he asks if he's the criminal now, and the people start whispering, wondering what's going on, and they think that if what that man says is true, they wonder if it doesn't mean that Lady Selena and Apicius are innocent, so they start to think that the protagonist is the real culprit, but they also wonder if he's not being used too much for a criminal. They also start to believe that his ring is a fake, and Count Benzaly comments that he had already confirmed that Apicius was the one with the ring, and he also said that the ring in the protagonist's possession is most likely a fake or a different ring, as the real ring has a mark of authenticity on the inside. And at that moment, the delivery man looks at Adelia and asks if she could confirm the authenticity of that ring for them. Calling her a madam, they throw the ring in her hand, and she says it's all right, and she sees the shine of the ring and the mark inside, and she says that there it is said that the Archmage Gregory had her lord's name inscribed on the inside of that ring, and she confirms it, saying that this ring does indeed bear the inscription of Count Benzaly's name, and people started whispering, making various comments. They wondered if that man really was the real culprit. referring to the protagonist. But they also didn't understand why he would have the ring of courage in the first place. Whispering, they wondered if the ring shouldn't be in the Count's possession. At this, Tija shouts, saying that this is how it is. Just the fact that the ring is in his possession, he thinks, is enough to prove that the Count condemned those two to death without solid proof. And then the delivery man opens his delivery box and says, not to mention, that he didn't enter the Count's castle with the intention of killing him. He takes out the bowl and says that that bowl is the proof, pointing the bowl up and saying that Lady Selena had ordered food yesterday. And he also says that Lady Selena didn't visit Apicius yesterday to plan Count Benzeli's murder, and explains that she simply wanted to share a meal with her beloved. While Selena was tied up, she hears the protagonist saying that, and is taken by surprise, her mouth hanging open, and Lady Selena doesn't understand. With a tone of doubt, she asks if she really did it, and Apicius replies to Selena that they will remain silent for the time being. And the delivery man goes on to say that he is sure that the investigation the Count had done into the assassination attempt was complete, but there is not enough evidence to show that there was an attempt, which makes him wonder if it was just a conspiracy. And at that moment, Count Benzeli called his guard named Doria, and the guard quickly got into position, saying that he was listening to what his master had to say. And Count Benzeli tells Doria that the man's words referring to Tija ring true. So he asks Doria what he has to say as the one who led the investigation. And Doria, visibly desperate, answers his lord, asking how he can trust the words of that nameless stranger, on the advice of someone who had served him faithfully for decades, showing that he was upset about it. And at that moment, the delivery man asks the spirit if he is sure that this should be enough to stop the execution. And Hela, surprised, answers him, saying that he has nerves of steel. And then Adelia asks Tija if he had some kind of informant, and he answers her by asking what she means by having an informant, and also asks why he would have something like that. Lady Adelia then asks him how he knew that Selena and Apicius were in love, and the young man answers the blonde, saying that it was just a thought of his, and he imagined that those two were a couple because of the way they were acting. And at that moment, the Count shouts, saying that the Tija has been there before, and he must have visited before to look for it. But the boy simply interrupts, saying that it's not that, until he hears a noise, which interrupts him too. They are shocked to hear the noise, and a head quickly appears near him and Adelia. He goes wide-eyed at the sight. His head was there, rolling, and the protagonist sighs at that moment, desperate and wondering what it is. The Count had simply killed Doria, and the delivery man, in shock, says that's not it, but he's interrupted by Hela, covering his eyes and asking him not to see that. And she says that Count Benzeli is just a crazy sociopath, until the Count shouts for everyone there to be quiet, and all the people who were there start kneeling down, and the protagonist doesn't understand, asking if they should kneel down too. And Hela answers him, saying that they don't live there, so she wonders why they should do that. And at that moment, Count Benzeli says that for the crime of clouding everyone's judgment by misleading the investigation, Doria ended up paying with his life. And now that it's been proven that Apicius and Selena are innocent, he's going to free them both and offer compensation for the false accusation and beyond. The Count stars, and Tija, not understanding anything and getting a little worried, asks if Count Benzeli has just looked at him, and Hela tells the boy that he shouldn't let himself be intimidated by the Count, because he hasn't done anything wrong. And at that moment, contrary to all the protagonist's worries, the old Count begins to smile, saying that he will show his appreciation for the hero who prevented his daughter's death, and he will organize a festival in his honor. And everyone starts shouting and throwing their hands up, demonstrating a vibe, giving salutes to Count Benzeli and salutes to the hero, and they get anxious because they're going to have a festival, and it's time to celebrate. And at that moment, the protagonist is a little confused and asks what this is that's happening all of a sudden, and Lady Adelia explains to him that even the commoners receive elegant meals during the festivals, and that's why this absurd joy is happening. And then she thanks the protagonist, and he doesn't understand, asking her why she's thanking him, and she says it's because he saved her sister. Then Selena and Apicius go up to the protagonist, and she keeps turning her face away and thanking Tija, and Apicius makes it clear to Lady Selena that she should look someone in the eye when thanking them. And then, looking into Tija's eyes, Apicius says that he is truly grateful to the Deliveryman for saving Selena's life, and the Deliveryman tells Apicius, denying it, that he is sure that anyone would have done the same, and at the same time, he thinks that Apicius is literally the only normal person there. However, Apicius denies it and tells him that very few people would go out of their way to help a stranger, and the protagonist replies to him, saying that in this case, he says that he actually had personal reasons for helping. Hela asks him what's wrong, and the protagonist replies that it's nothing. It's just that. He just hates parents who don't act like proper parents. He really hates it. He probably feels it because his parents might have done the same. And then the scene changes. And on this, Count Benzeli comments that Doria's head was worth more than those two fools combined, and he thinks that's a shame, until he turned around, talking to Adelia, and he had a tone of doubt at that moment, and then he asks how it's going with Tija, and Lady Adela, in her white mask, answered her father, saying that she had successfully become Tija's companion. After all, it was all an elaborate plan, and Count Benzeli replies to his daughter, saying that he knew he could count on her, and he starts laughing. While the daughter thanks her father, and she also speaks up, asking her father just to give her a little more time, and she'll be sure to win his trust and put him under her control. Then the scene switches to the outside of the castle, and the delivery man was with the spirit by his side, and they were looking at the view from there, and at that, Hela sighs, and then she says hello to the boy, asks if he's alright, and he replies that he's fine, and he explains that he's simply never seen a scene like that before, but he's fine. And the red-haired girl catches his eye, and she says that compared to him, that idiot Selena is an award-winning actress, and Tija tells the spirit that this is difficult and not an attitude, but he's really fine, until they hear a good laugh. They heard people making out and laughing, and then Hela says something that he misunderstands, and the protagonist asks her what it was, and she tells him that the people who laughed and had fun were the ones who were strong enough to endure this incident. Those who weren't are probably suffering, just like the protagonist himself, and he answers her, laughing, and saying that she's right, and he thinks he's weaker than her. After all, for him, she's just muscle and no brains. And Hela asks if that's what she gets for trying to make him feel better, and that's why she hates people. And then Adelia approaches them both, not knowing how to get there. Tija sees her smiling and asks what she wants, and she tells the boy that he should join in. After all, the party is in his honor, and she asks how the delivery business is going, and he replies that all he can think of now is all the trouble they've caused, and she starts laughing, and he makes it clear that he hasn't finished any deliveries yet, and then the blonde tells him that those people downstairs will make some requests when they find out about the great food in his kingdom, and he gets a little doubtful at that moment, and he tells her that he'd like to see her thinking along those lines too. But he keeps quiet, and Adelia asks if he's ever tried marketing himself, and the boy replies that none of them want to listen to him, and she comments that perhaps he needs to meet certain qualifications to make requests of other kingdoms, and perhaps it's only for aristocrats. And the protagonist replies to her that perhaps, just as Adelia was about to continue the conversation, two guards approached, asking to be excused. They tell him that Count Benzeli is asking for Tija, and he asks if the Count is really looking for him, and the guard says yes and asks if he could please go with them, and then Tija, who clearly could go, thinks he has no reason not to, and Adelia asks where her father is now. At this, the boy answers his lady, saying that the Count has asked Tija to go alone, and walking by a delivery box. The protagonist tells her as he walks that his name is Tija, C.O. Tija, and she's impressed at that moment, and he says that's his name, and he's only going to tell her once, and the blonde, quite enthusiastic, says yes and thanks him for it. And at that moment, the spirit, sitting on her shoulder, comments that she thought he hated her, and the delivery man asks if she's serious, and Hela tells him that when she followed him to the hut, he simply acted as if he couldn't stand her, and Tija replies to her, saying that he thinks she's right, but also, he thinks there's no harm in saying his name to her, and the spirit agrees with him, but wants to know what happened with this sudden change of mind, and he replies, saying that he just had. He feels bad for her, since it clearly seems that she has grown up without loving peace. And Hela asks if the protagonist is in love with her, and while the two of them are talking, Adelia is watching them walk along with the guards, and then he asks the spirit if he has gone mad. Just as he was about to speak, he looked at Adelia, who was beautifully waving at him, and then he tells Hela that he felt bad for Adelia, and that's all. And Hela asks him if he really feels bad for her, reminding him that her father is the most powerful man on this continent. And the delivery man tells the spirit that Count Benzeli is no different from him or her, and furious, Hela asks him what he means by that, and asks him if he hasn't just seen how he killed someone without even thinking a second time, practically fighting with the protagonist, and tries to appease the situation. He tells her that he's understood, and asks her to stop threatening to hit him. He then arrives at the Count's throne and comments that he heard the Count had asked for him, and Count Benzeli stares at him. Tija doesn't quite understand and asks Hela, whispering why the Count is looking at him like that, and she replies that he's just trying to be dramatic, and the Count tells the boy that he called him there because he has something he wants to ask him, and the delivery man asks Count Benzeli what it is, and quickly, the spirit tells Tija to refuse, no matter what, but the boy whispers, saying that they don't know what he's going to ask for, and Hela replies that the Count has no respect for the lives of others and he could kill him if he simply goes against him, no matter what the request is, and Tija whispers, saying that he understood what she wanted to say and asks her to stay calm. And then the protagonist apologizes and asks if he can hear what his request is before agreeing to it, and the Count replies that he can clearly do that. Smiling, he asks the boy if he could place an order with Tija, and at that moment, Tija doesn't understand anything, and Hela doesn't either. He then exits the portal, and as he starts to climb the stairs of the restaurant he owns with his brother, he says to himself that he can't believe the Count called him just to make a delivery request. And anyway, he thinks it's good that it's not a dangerous request. And then the protagonist is surprised. It was overcrowded, and a customer asked if he could place an order, and the delivery man looks doubtful. He sees the customers asking for more pickles, asking for some water, and there was Taehyung in the peak, taking the bottle of water and asking for a minute, and then Tija wonders why it's so crowded, and at that moment, Taehyung, with a smile on his face, calls the customer madam and tells her the list of the bottle, and the girl thanks him, and Tija, seeing this, comments that his brother is waiting tables, and he wonders if it's a dream, and he starts pinching himself to see if it's true or not. And then Taehyung, his brother, comes back, and I think it's a great moment, and he asks him for help, and the protagonist says that he's clearly going to join him, and then the sunset arrives, and Taehyung bowed to the customers who were leaving and thanked them, asking them to come back again and again. Taehyung tells his brother that he did a great job, and the delivery man replies that all he did was serve a few tables, and then Taehyung asks if he's right that the protagonist said he had a delivery order, and asks how much time he has left, and Tija takes the map and says they have plenty of time. And then the scene changes to Taehyung saying that it's 2 portions of spicy noodles and 1 each of nice chicken and pork, and Tija asks him to make them all big, and then Taehyung is working in the kitchen, with fire everywhere and pouring the chili sauce, and the delivery man just watches his brother do it. He then asks Taehyung if he's had any good news lately, but his brother replies that actually, there's nothing in particular, and Tija asks if he's serious. Then Tija asks if old man Sloan has come to meet him, and Taehyung answers his brother, a little surprised, asking if Sloan is the guy who hired him, and asks Tija, or why he would meet the old man. And Tija shakes his head, saying he doesn't know, and if Taehyung is saying it, fine. And then he goes to the stairs and down, telling his brother not to try too hard, and Taehyung asks how he could not make an effort, wondering when your brother is risking his life at work, and he looks at your hand. He tells himself, with a potion in his hand, that he too has to do what he can. The scene then shifts to old Sloane's cabin, and there was the protagonist inside it. The spirit looks at Tija and has a tone of doubt at that moment, and then you say hi to him, and he says hi back, and then Hela asks why he seems so down. Tija sits down and tells Hela that he thinks Taehyung is seeing someone, and she asks if he's talking about his brother, and Hela, in shock, tells the protagonist not to say he's one of them, and Tija screams, telling the spirit to stop being sick and putting his hand on his head. Hela explains that Taehyung had suddenly gotten better, and the red-haired girl asks if he means that as a new doctor and asks if he doesn't think that's a good thing, and also asks why he didn't just say so, and he responds by saying that there's a catch. He can't help but feel that there's something unknown going on, and Hela asks what he means, and the delivery man explains that he has never seen Taehyung talking to anyone except himself. But now Taehyung is so different that he is calm with all the customers, and the spirit replies that this seems strange. She asks him if he has any idea who it could be, and he replies, saying that he has, but he doesn't want to tell her, and Hela gets very frustrated at that moment, and asks why, and he explains that it's because it's just a guess, and he'd feel bad if he was wrong, and the spirit, after hearing him say it, asks if that's the only reason, and then the delivery man asks what else he could see, and Hela replies, saying that she doesn't know why he touched the total, and then the boy tells her that they don't have much time, and they should go soon, and she tells him that it's fine with her, while the protagonist opens the map, and then, seeing the glow on the map, he asks the spirit if he's not too old to be angry about things like that, and she gets annoyed, and I ask what he means, and she also asks if he's saying that she looks old, and Taeja replies to her that there's no way, being very pretentious and trying to escape a possible problem. He says that she doesn't look a day over 20, and Hela tells him to shut up. And then, the boy thinks that if his suspicions are correct, Hela can't be trusted either, and in the glare, he thinks he'll keep his thoughts to himself for now. The scene then switches to Taeja, who goes up to Count Benzeli and hands the bowl to the customer, saying that there was his order, and the Count comments that this sounds very good, while the boy asks him to enjoy his meal, and Adelia comments that she's sure he will, and at that moment, Hela asks the delivery man if he isn't afraid that the Count won't like it, but, feeling quite confident, he replies that he has faith in his brother's kitchen, and Hela says it's just for him to know, and says that Count Benzeli is known for being a great gourmet, and Taeja thinks she's making fun of him, saying that their food can't be compared to modern cuisine, and then the Count picked up his chicken pieces with his hashi. Not just him, but Adelia too. He kept his eyes closed, savoring as he ate, and your daughter does the same, until he simply has an explosion of flavors, saying that it's very good, and his daughter, with her cheeks flushed, says that it's delicious. Then Taeja asks the spirit if she saw what he said, and Hela, incredulous, says that she really can't understand, and Count Benzeli, quite inspired by the taste, says that the sauce is salty, but at the same time, it's sweet, and the fried meat is crispy on the outside, but soft on the inside, and really, he thinks it's an exquisite meal. He's dazzled at that moment, while Adelia, with her cheeks flushed, comments that she loves that the sauce is sweet, but still has a bit of acid, and the protagonist says that they are being very kind, and the Count continues, saying that the spice numbs his mouth, but he just can't stop eating, and now he can understand why people love spicy food, while his daughter, smiling, says that now she too understands the appeal of spicy food, and Hela, hearing the two's opinion, is shocked, and asks if it's really very good. She's curious, and Taeja says that she simply hasn't had the chance to try his brother's food yet, and then Count Benzeli comments that the place he was commissioned from last time was just awful, but it seems that Sloan has really outdone himself with this new place, and Adelia asks her father if he has ever commissioned from the other kingdom before, and he answers yes, but the last delivery man was a bloody dirty ruffian with horrible cooking skills, and his only saving grace was his speed, and Adelia comments that it seems he ordered from them regularly, and the Count comments that they have been once or twice, and it is a wonderful privilege to be able to taste food that no one else in the world has ever tried, and the girl is a little confused at that moment, asking her father why he has never shared any with them, and he starts laughing, apologizing for it, and says that the last place was so terrible that he didn't think it was worth sharing, and then Hela gets annoyed and starts shaking his hands, and Taeja sees this. Becoming doubtful at that moment, he asks the two of them to enjoy the rest of the meal, and Adelia asks why he hasn't joined them, as he's barely eaten anything at the party. Count Benzeli says yes and asks him to join them, but the boy denies it, saying that everything is fine, and smiling, He says that the two of them seem to be enjoying some quality father-daughter time, so he's not going to interrupt. And the two of them start laughing, saying that it's fine, and they'll let you know when they're done, and Tija thanks them for it. Curious, the girl asks her father how it went with the last delivery man, and he replies that the delivery man was a brute. If I may put it another way, he thinks the delivery man was an uneducated canary. Then the scene changes. The protagonist is outside on Saturday, and surprised. He thinks the day has been intense and they should take a quick break, and sits down on the ground. Hela was in small form. After he sits down, she returns to her normal size, trying to sit next to him, and he sees that she looks a little upset, but he doesn't say anything. And then she keeps quiet, looking around, and he keeps watching her. And then Tija asks Hela if Count Benzeli is always like this, and she replies by asking him how the hell she could know. And the boy tries to warn her that he's really just talking, and asks her if she doesn't think he's being very rude. But at the same time, he thinks he'll let it go as she appears very depressed, and she replies that clearly he was, but she's used to all this nonsense because she's been through it. The guy starts laughing, trying to break the ice, and at the same time he thinks it looks like she's very angry. And then Hela asks the delivery man if he has figured it out yet, and she thought he was smarter. And the protagonist asks her what she means by figuring it out. She says that she was the one who made the deliveries before he arrived. And the boy replies that he already had his suspicions, and she doesn't understand, asking why he hadn't asked her about it. And Tija replies to her, saying that it seemed to be a delicate matter, so he didn't want to be invasive, and she replies, saying that Tija is very strange, and she would have tried to get any information she could if she were him, and asks if he had bumped his head on the way, or is simply losing his touch. And while she's asking these questions, the protagonist thinks she's very bad, and answering her in a better way. He says that he prefers to respect people's privacy, and waving his hand to and fro, he asks her if she's ever heard of boundaries, and the spirit asks him to be honest, and asks if she's right that he has a million questions for her, and Tija thinks it's better to let it go, until she talks about Jonathan Blatter, and he doesn't understand, asking her what she's talking about, and she explains that it was him that Count Benzeli was complaining about, and she says that he's her boyfriend. They were human, just like the protagonist, and they used to deliver together. And Tija comments that that's a nice name and asks what he was like, and she says that he always wore a leather jacket with leather pants and studded boots, just like her. And again, the protagonist asks what he looked like, and the spirit replies, a little reluctantly, that I don't remember his face, and starts to get restless. And Tija doesn't understand a thing. Shaken, she tells the protagonist that she had forgotten, and he asks how this is possible. And Hela tells him that no matter how hard she tries, she can't remember what he was like before he changed. And she feels very affected talking about it, putting her hands to her head, and the boy tries to console her, saying that it's okay and she shouldn't be like this, and at that, he wonders what she meant by him changing. And the red-haired girl asks him if he knows about that keychain of his, and he asks her if she's talking about the burning skull, and she explains that that's how Jonathan Blade is now, leaving the protagonist surprised, and he asks her if Jonathan Blade has a burning passion for chairs and motorcycles, and she's amazed. Open-mouthed, she asks the guy how he knew, and she explains that he's a hell of a rider, so his motorcycles tend to get damaged a lot. And Tija comments that it was just a lucky guess, and at the same time he thinks it couldn't be more obvious. He also thinks that, a head on fire, dressed from head to toe in leather, he thinks that Jonathan Blade is practically a walking, talking parody of the Ghost Rider. And at that, he asks what happened to them, and at that, he wonders how the hell his boyfriend was turned into a copyright infringer, until the girl takes one look at him, and he starts shaking, wondering what's wrong, and she asks if the boy trusts her, and he's quite frank, saying that he's not sure, and asks her why she's asking that, and Hela starts laughing, saying that she thought not, and she smiles without saying anything for a moment, and at that moment, Tija is surprised, and then Hela asks if they could get back to work, and quickly gets up. Just then, the guard appears, telling the delivery man that Lady Adelia is asking for him, and he answers the guard, saying that everything is fine. And at that moment, Hela had returned to the small size she was before, and then, sitting on the boy's shoulder, she comments that this has certainly taken a big load off her mind, and Tija says he's happy for her. Then he enters the castle, and the count tells him that he has the list, and Adelia, her cheeks flushing, welcomes him again, and Tija thanks her for it, at which point he wonders why she's blushing. And then, Count Benzeli says that there's his payment for the delivery, and he's only chosen items of great value, so he thinks the protagonist will think it's enough. He delivers it in a rather nice box, and Tija thanks him for it, and the Count has a special present for him to give to his daughter, who was very flushed at the moment. Count Benzeli says that from now on, he will leave his daughter in Tija's care, and the protagonist is very frustrated at that moment, and Hela thinks that this is something that can't be digested. A terrible mess has been created. And then Count Benzeli asks the boy if everything is alright, and I hope he found his present in good taste, and visibly worried, the boy starts shaking his head from side to side, denying any kind of displeasure, and says he's fine in a desperate way. And the Count asks if his daughter isn't good enough for the boy, and the delivery man replies that she isn't, and explains that he simply doesn't believe in giving or receiving human beings as gifts. And the Count, after listening to Tija's explanation, says that he understands, and says that things must be different in his kingdom. And at that moment, Tija sighs a relief, while Hela says that she is still nauseous. And then Lady Adelia tells her father that everything is fine, and she thinks they can start becoming friends and then see where it takes them. And Benzeli tells his daughter, who clearly agrees with her, he thinks there's no need to rush. And then the Count makes room for them both, and the girl asks if her father won't be staying for a while, but her father grabs her head, gives it a little stroke, and asks her to remember to be careful out there. He asks her to be safe first, and Adelia, her cheeks flushed, tells her father that she won't forget. And at that moment, the Tija whispers, wondering if this is the same guy who just tried his other daughter's head. He was in wide-eyed shock, wondering if he has multiple personalities or something, and the spirit thinks he's definitely not right in the head, until the blonde goes smiling towards the protagonist, while he keeps walking backward, smiling and with flushed cheeks. She asks Tija where they're going now, calling him sweetheart, and the delivery man, visibly nervous, his eyes wide. He didn't know what to say to her, and Hela asks them to run now, and quickly. Tija runs, because he has a love of life, and Adelia asks if he's trying to escape and asks if he's not forgetting something. With the bowl in her hand, smiling and looking quite happy, she asks if he doesn't need it to go back to the hut. She really did know how to buy it, and the delivery man, very frustrated, asks or why his customers keep using the bowls as blackmail. Hela says that they are very hurt at that moment, and they start to sigh. Adelia then tells the boy that she is looking forward to working with him, until she is interrupted by the delivery man looking at the bowl and asking her to wait a while because he has something he wants in return, and she asks, rather curiously, what that would be, and Tija, smiling, replies, saying that she had told him that her information gathering skills were of high quality, and he asks if he is sure of that, and he also asks if he could ask her to put those skills to work for him, and the blonde answers him, saying that it's all right as long as he doesn't ask for anything impossible, and hands him the bowl. He says that he understood, and at that moment, Hela says that she is Count Benzeli's daughter, and asks him if he's sure of that, because they don't really know when she's going to betray them. And Tija whispers to her that there's no harm in using her abilities as an advantage, and asks if she already knew he'd thought of it. But Hela doesn't think him thinking of it will change anything, and Adelia tells Tija that he said he wasn't a spirit wizard, so she's pretending not to notice. But in the end, it seems he has a spirit, and the boy answers her, saying that everything is fine, and he admits that he has a spirit, but he makes it clear that this spirit is terrible and really very annoying. And Hela stands there with her mouth open, asking what he has just said, and saying that he is annoying and not her. And Adelia answers the boy, saying that she understands and asks when they are going back to the cabin. And Tija, not understanding, tells him that they'll go back to the hut when he gets his next order, and the pretty blonde asks if that's the case, in which case she knows the perfect person to recommend to the delivery man, and curious Tija asks who it is, and Adelia, smiling, asks him if he's ever heard of an archmage, and he doesn't quite understand what an archmage is and wonders if it's some kind of extra large wizard, showing that he has an unbalanced intelligence. The scene then switches to Count Bensley slicing his piece of meat, and he picks up his fork, and I put a piece of meat in his mouth, and after eating his meal, he uses a cloth to wipe his mouth, and then, while the waitress is pouring a little drink into his glass, he says that this is terrible, and looking, he asks if it's possible to place another order, and Sloane becomes pensive at that moment, and then he tells the Count that he thinks he'd better ask Tija about it, and the Count tells the old man that it looks like he's actually hired someone indecent for the first time, but Sloane makes it clear to the Count that he's very careful to hire only the best, and with his glass in hand, Bensley asks if he's serious, because the last man he hired made the most horrible food he's ever eaten in his life, and Sloane makes it clear that there are few chefs on the entire continent who could satisfy a gourmet like Count Bensley himself. All the others who made his request had nothing but good things to say. He makes it clear that he was the worst, even after taking taste into account, and Sloane replies that it was he himself who insisted on ordering with him, and the Count stares at Sloane, saying that he doesn't think he likes his tone very much. And the old man answers Count Bensley, saying that he doesn't think he likes to hear them bad-mouthing his employees. At this, the Count comments that apart from that, he almost lost his daughter today, and Sloane, waving the knife from side to side, feigns surprise and says that this is terrible for the Count. And the old Earl says it was all because of Sloane's request, so he feels Sloane needs to take responsibility. And at that moment, the old man laughs heartily, asking the Count if it wasn't all just a play based on a script they both agreed on, and he wouldn't call it a request. And Count Bensley, with a very dark tone in his voice, comments that Sloane's plan was to imprison Apicius, who had despised him for a long time. So he was going to manipulate Selena into placing orders with the International Delivery Service in Kingdoms. The naive Selena gave Tija the ring of courage that marked him out as the assassin, because she wanted to save him if he was loved, and Tija had to cooperate with Adelia to clear his name, and Bensley would use this promotion to execute Apicius for treason and attempted murder, along with Selena for helping and encouraging him. The old man makes it clear that the Count would get rid of one of the thorns in his side, and Sloane could see how Tija deals with the crisis situation. But then, the Count chooses to rewrite the script, and Count Bensley tells Sloane that the rookie he hired ended up making him execute one of his best men, and Sloane, with the answer on the tip of his tongue, tells the Count that this is what he got for changing the script without consulting him, and the Count asks Sloane, what choice did he have? The star of the show had disappeared, and he needed to do everything he could to force him back. And Sloane makes it clear that this was the Count's, not his, or perhaps, the Count should simply blame the scriptwriter. And then he stands up and says that everything Tija did was to get out of there alive, and they should leave it at that. And walking along, Sloane comments that he doesn't think the Count realizes how restrained Sloane has been with him. And then he turns his face away, saying that that night's life was a cheap price to pay for sending that shadow to chase Tija. And then he turns his back and says that the Count had better not try to take advantage of his employee ever again. And the Count stands there, just watching Sloane go, sitting at his desk with a glass of drink in his hand, having the shallow life that anyone would want to be in, until he gets really angry and breaks the cup with his own hand, putting pressure on it. And he asks himself, how dare Sloane, acting all high and mighty when all he does is sell food, mistreat the services Sloane provides, and his employee gets quite scared seeing the blood on his hand. And at that moment, the corridor was empty. While the old Earl was very angry, he said to himself that they would see if Sloane could speak up, thinking he was superior, when he simply took the damned deliveryman away from him. The scene then shifts to the outside of the castle, and Lady Selena, crying, asks her sister if she really has to leave, and Adelia asks her sister not to cry, and it's not as if she's leaving home forever, and Tija sees it. He thinks it's too cringe. He can't even look at it, and the spirit on his shoulder also suffers from it, saying that they give him the creeps. And then Apicius tells the protagonist that he had saved his life, and now he's leaving before he can repay him. However, the delivery man makes it clear that they were lucky. It was only possible because of that big crowd. So he asks Apicius to please stay safe and out of the Count's sight. And Apicius takes the delivery man's hand and asks him not to worry, as he is planning to move away. boy, and thanks him again, saying that he is forever in Tija's debt. And then Tija throws the helmet into Adelia's hands, saying that they're going to take Scooter, so she needs to wear the helmet. And now you don't understand anything, asking what a sculpture would be and wondering if it's some kind of horse from another kingdom. And Tija makes it clear to her that he's not a horse and is much faster than that, and makes it clear that the helmet is to protect her head. And Adelia calls the helmet a device and says it's something fascinating. And then Lady Selena asks her sister to take care of herself, and Apicius gives God to Adelia and asks her to keep her safety first, and wishes them both a safe journey. Hela was in front as if she were a pet, and then Tija turns the throttle, and Selena and Apicius watching the two of them drive away on that scooter. And the boy tells Selena that they should also start getting ready to leave, and Selena, visibly worried, asks if she is sure that her sister will be all right, and the boy answers her, saying that they will be fine. After all, they are both very intelligent people. And at that moment, Apicius thinks, asking God to take care of their journey. Then the scene changes to a place lit only by a lantern and a man beating his hands on the table, lamenting a lot, and a green liquid that appears to be acid starts to spill after he hits the table. That man was really angry. He looked like a mad genius, and he tells himself that the calculations were perfect. Then he wonders why it doesn't work, until he turns around and looks at the container spilling the acid on the floor. And then, with his eyes crystallized from so much stress, he denies it to himself, showing his discontent, telling himself that there's no way he's wrong. And then he tries to readjust by doing it all over again. He tells himself that he's always right and he just needs to find a tougher test subject. And he starts whistling to distress. And then, pouring the liquid into the other container, he asks himself, which one should he choose to be his next guinea pig? A unique and strong specimen would be ideal, something difficult to find in these parts. Then to a town that was quite busy, and there was a statue of a horse there. Tija and Adelia are surprised by what they see, and so is the spirit, saying that the place is packed, and the delivery man comments that it certainly looks different from where she lives, and Lady Count Benzeli's daughter explains that this is because Archmage Gregory's domain is the most populous region on the entire continent. And while he was walking, a boy simply walked past the delivery man with a stick in his hand, telling the girl in front of him to wait, and Tija ended up being surprised at that moment. He then asks the girl if all archmages live in places like this, and she replies that no, each archmage is different, so each one has their own preferences. And then Tija asks where this archmage is after all, and the girl, smiling, points in the direction and says it's right there. And Hela asks where, and the protagonist asks if she's talking from up there, and Adelia says yes, and Hela, seeing that tower, says it's incredible, and the protagonist thinks that the archmages certainly have a common taste in houses, and the blonde makes it clear that not all of them. Some archmages prefer to live in more normal houses, while others even live in caves, and Hela, listening, says that's exactly what it is. And then the protagonist asks her if she's been there before, and she replies that she clearly hasn't. She's only been to places where she's received requests, and Adelia doesn't understand anything about that moment. And Tija asks the spirit where else he's been, and she begins to think that she has been in heaven and not in the kingdom of demons, and she thinks that she has been in the kingdom of spirits, and she could also have visited the kingdom of beasts and the afterlife. Meanwhile, the blonde is confused, and the surprised Tija tells the spirit that he had no idea there were so many kingdoms, and Hela replies to him, saying that she hasn't actually had the chance to visit that many, and if he includes the realms that humans aren't allowed to enter, she's sure there are dozens of others. And Adela, seeing this, gets frustrated, thinking that the boy is talking to himself again. And then Adelia says that, to be quite honest, she's always wondered what he talks about with his spirit. And then the boy realizes she's there, and Hela screams, because for a minute she'd simply forgotten she was there. And then Hela asks the boy to let her hold his keychain, and he doesn't understand why and asks why. But as he asks, he takes the keychain, and the blonde sees it and asks if it's a figurine of a Hell Rider, and she thinks it's very well done. And at that moment, the boy asks her to hold the keyring, and she wonders why she's holding it. And suddenly, Hela appears to Adelia and screams. The blonde is startled and screams a lot, and Hela starts laughing and says that Adelia should have seen her own face. And at that moment, Either the protagonist was paying attention to the keychain that flew up and he tried to catch it in the air, and that makes it small. And then she stops at Adelia's head and smelling something. She tells the blonde that she smells good and Adelia thanks Hela for the compliment. And then the delivery man asks Adelia if she's ever seen a spirit like her. And Adelia tells him that no, it's the first time she's seen a spirit take on such a perfect human form, and Hela, feeling convinced, says that it's because she's not an ordinary spirit. And at that moment, taking his cue, the delivery man asks Adelia what she meant by Hell Rider. And she explains that they say the knights of hell catch fishermen and drag them to the kingdom of the devils. And Tija doesn't quite understand and asks why. And she explains that demons are always thirsty for battle, but there are railroad hierarchies in the demon realm that prevent them from fighting each other. So they take out their aggression on the sinners that the Hell Riders hand over to them. And Tija asks what she means by handing them over, because he thinks it's very similar to what he does. And then he asks if they deliver criminals, and she replies that it's not clear who determines when the Hell Riders show up. They come and go so randomly that they're sure they're making deliveries or simply doing what they want. And Hela asks what Shadow's head thinks. Adelia asks Hela if she's talking about her. Then she tells the red-haired girl that she thinks she's both, but Hela doesn't understand what she means by both. And Tija asks why. And Adelia replies that here they seem to be making deliveries, but they don't seem to be serving any particular demonic authority. And the protagonist, hearing her say this, comments that he thought she specialized in getting information, but all he's seeing is that she's just guessing. And he asks if she hadn't told him that she was dealing with objective truth, and asks if divination doesn't involve personal opinions. And the blonde gets uncomfortable with what he's just said and asks what he's trying to say. And she says that when one doesn't have all the facts, the best one can do is make an informed guess. And Tija asks him if he's right that she said she's been working in this job for 10 years. And Adelia, annoyed, says that she's already told him that they are, until she stops talking. And Hela doesn't say a word at that point. Then they start walking, and they arrive at a place. The boy asks if it's really okay if they just walk in, and Adelia explains that they're old acquaintances, so it should be fine. Just as he was about to touch the door, it starts to creak and open, and he's startled, asking what's going on and also asking if the door is automatic. With the door wide open, he asks her if it's really okay for them to just walk through, as he doesn't know if it's a trap and neither does she. But Adelia seems quite calm and says that if he's opened the door, then she believes he's inviting them in. And then they start up the stairs, and the delivery man asks if there's anything she's not sure about, and the blonde tells him that he only asks her things about which it's almost impossible to get solid information, and also, normal people haven't had the chance to meet a Hell Rider or Archmage. And Tija, surprised, asks him if he's serious, and he says he understands, and he starts to walk up the stairs very quickly. And she sees the boy walking up the stairs quickly and catches his eye, and she says that he knows she's trying her best, while Hela sits on her shoulder, not saying a word. And then Adelia asks the spirit why she's so quiet and asks what Hela is thinking. And Hela doesn't understand for a moment. And after touching herself, she starts to roll around in Adelia's head and says that she's not thinking about anything, and Adelia feels relieved until they hear a scream. And worried, Hela asks what it was, and the blonde worries if it was Tija. She quickly starts to climb the stairs, calling out the protagonist's name, while the spirit wonders what's going on. And then they see the Archmage, the protagonist's delivery box, saying that this is the artifact he's been waiting for. And the visibly frightened Tija asks what the hell he's talking about and calls him crazy, while the old man tells him to deliver it right away. And without understanding anything, Adelia asks if it really is Archmage Gregorio, and Hela wonders what all the fuss is about. And Gregorio looks at her wide-eyed and begins to get apprehensive. And the protagonist asks the blonde what's wrong with this old man. And the old man jumps into his chair. The old man realizes that he has guests, and quickly turns around. And he says it's a pleasure to meet you. And he says he's Gregorio, the one who's getting close to the truth. And the three of us are completely confused, wondering what happened to bring about this sudden change. And then Adelia approaches the old man and says that they had met once before and asks if he remembers her. And Gregorio asks if it was when he gave the ring to Count Benzeli, and clearly he remembers her. And Hela asks the delivery man what's up with that old man. And the boy answers her, saying that he has no idea, and he thinks the old man is very crazy, playing on the way he is suddenly acting normally. And then Tija asks the old man what he means by almost getting closer to the truth, and he asks if Gregorio is getting closer to the truth or not. And Hela tries to remind the protagonist that that old man is an archmage, and the girl explains that they refer to those who overcome, structure, or sometimes strengthen nature, as those who get closer to the truth, and Tija doesn't quite understand and asks if that doesn't mean he's nowhere near the truth. Otherwise, everyone should be calling magicians as those who are almost archmages. And the old man gets very angry at what he's just heard from the boy, pointing and asking Tija what he's about to say, and comments that his research is a sin, and he's never made a mistake in his life, and if he had a stronger artifact, he wouldn't just be getting closer to the truth, he'd be there by now. And he makes it clear that the protagonist has no idea what his work is about and asks if he's sure about it. And when Tija sees what it is, he's sure the delivery man will be on his knees begging for some of his magic. And Tija, listening to him, comments that a master craftsman never blames his tools, and Hela asks the protagonist to wake her up when he's finished there, because she's finding that conversation very boring. Trembling, Gregorio says that these idiots don't even know what cis is. Adelia tries to calm the situation, explaining that they are from another kingdom. Then she asks Gregorio to please leave it alone. However, the old man is a bit neurotic. He points to the protagonist's metal box and asks him to lend it to him, and he goes to prove his worth to Tija, but the boy asks what he wants to prove, and the old man, almost collapsing, shouts that he is clearly close to the truth, and Tija asks why he would have to entrust his artifact to a hacker who is getting close to the truth, and after hearing him say that, Gregorio starts stammering the word hack, almost making himself ill, and the blonde girl watches worriedly. And then the old man throws himself on the floor and says that he's never been insulted in his life, and Adelia asks Tija not to do it. But the delivery man doesn't understand anything that's going on. After all, in his kingdom, there are no such crazy things. Then he hands his delivery box to the old man and asks if he still understands why he's making such a fuss. And Gregorio asks if this isn't the delivery box Hephaestus himself gave him, now used exclusively to deliver pasta. And Tija is extremely shocked after hearing Gregorio say that, with his mouth open. He asks the old man how he knew, and Hela was also open-mouthed, saying that then, he really does know things. And at that moment, Gregorio asks if the boy now believes him, and Gregorio comments to the young protagonist that he has tried hundreds of artifacts so far, which is why he would like to borrow his delivery box. But the delivery man quickly turns his arm and asks what happened to all those artifacts after his experiments, and Gregorio, not knowing how to speak, keeps looking to and fro, while Tija waits for an answer, and the spirit says that Gregorio is actually a charlatan, until suddenly, Gregorio says that the protagonist leaves him with no choice, and he simply takes the artifact from the protagonist by force, and uses a magical power called a lightning spear. And Tija thinks about that moment while holding his delivery box, and the archmage tells him that he'd better put down that delivery box if he wants to live, and at the same time, he thinks he can finally give it a try, until a flash happens inside that place, and the archmage, visibly desperate, starts running, saying that this is his chance. He keeps looking at that delivery box and telling her to wait for him, calling the delivery box precious even, and he goes after her. But at that moment, Tija apologizes to him because he had absorbed Gregory's power and takes his sword from inside the delivery box, saying that he has the right to refuse service, making a cut causing a big explosion, an explosion that sends the old man flying, until the blue crystal flew away, and the protagonist picks it up and wonders what it is. And the spirit says it's a jewel. That jewel shone brightly, and the system panel shows that Dionysus' delivery rate is reacting to Jade's jewel, that the individual can use the jewel to activate the delivery box's unknown mode. And Tija doesn't understand what this incognito mode is all about. And the system panel asks if the boy is going to wear the jewel, and the delivery man doesn't understand anything at that moment, while the spirit asks him what it is, and Adelia asks what he's looking at, and Tija asks Hela if she can't see that, referring to the panel right in front of him, and Hela answers the boy, saying that she can't see anything and shaking her head to and fro. The blonde says that she can't see it either, and Tija tells the two that it's asking him if he wants to use the crystal, until they hear a huge, gale force scream, asking what the boy has just said, and Gregorio on the ground, a little bewildered, telling the delivery man that he should say yes, makes it clear that he should wear the jewel. But both the blonde and the protagonist are apprehensive at that moment, and Tija, really annoyed, says that he should have done away with Gregorio. And Hela asks him to stop it, because he doesn't have the courage, and Adelia comments that Lord Reliva wouldn't be happy about it. And then Gregorio asks the protagonist for a favor, saying that he's begging him to just wear the jewel, crawling on the floor and shaking a lot, making for a super dramatic scene. And Tija thinks there's a catch. Using it in his delivery box could break it, and Hela says that yes, trying to strengthen the box with any old item could destroy it. But Gregorio makes it clear that this isn't possible, and Gregorio asks if the protagonist hadn't said that he had received a notice asking if he wanted to wear it, and that this could only happen if the jewel was compatible with the delivery box. That is the guarantee that the jewel can be worn in the box without breaking. And the delivery man then asks where the guarantee is that wearing this jewel won't damage his delivery box. And sweating, getting slightly nervous, Gregorio doesn't quite know what to say. Tija says that he already knew, and that he won't use it. But Gregorio asks him not to. He explains that it's an artifact from another kingdom, so it might cause a different reaction. But he swears on his own life of research that the fortification won't fail, so please. He asks the boy to use the crystal, and Tija gets pensive at that moment, and Adelia asks if he simply can't try. After all, the Archmage even knelt down, and Hela makes it clear that it's the boy's choice, but it will also be his responsibility if something breaks. And then Tija, smiling, crouches down and tells Gregorio that he'll use it if Gregorio does him a favor, and the old man, desperate, tells the delivery man that he'll do anything. And then the boy asks if Gregorio is hungry, and then he shows a flyer from his restaurant, Wok Brothers, saying that he should order now and get a free portion of pickles, at which point he's smiling a lot, and the spirit says that there's a catch. Pickles are always free, calling him an idiot. Tija then returns to Sloane's cabin through the portal, and the boy comments to the spirit that it was certainly crazy, and Hela tells him that it's been a long day. And then she asks him if he's really going to wear that jewel, and he says maybe, and Hela comments that she doesn't know anything about it, so she can't give him any advice, and the boy says that she shouldn't worry, because he really didn't expect anything from her, and the spirit gets very angry, asking what he just said. And then Tija says that they're going to ask someone who knows about these things, and she asks who would know, until Tija starts shouting, asking if Sloane is inside the cabin. And Hela asks if he really thinks the old man is going to show up, until suddenly, contrary to all statistics and Hela herself, Sloane shows up, asking if the delivery man was looking for him, and she's left lamenting about it. And the boy said he had something he wanted to ask the old man, and the old man replied that if it was within his reach, he could answer. Then he shows the panel and asks the old man what it is, and Sloane can see, while the spirit is very upset because he can't see anything. Smiling, Sloane comments that it's a device that makes communication between dimensions more effective, and the protagonist asks what that means, and Hela comments that that's exactly what she was going to ask, and Sloane asks him to let him explain it as simply as possible. He explains that there are many different kingdoms, but for the sake of convenience, they will call them this and other kingdoms. The two kingdoms have many differences, including cuisine, clothing, and lifestyles, so meeting a person from another kingdom can be a daunting encounter, especially when the individual meets people with magical powers that don't exist in his own realm. And the protagonist, thinking about what he's saying, says that he thinks this is true, and the old man comments that then, this device was made to help the individual understand all these unknown situations and items, and Tija comments that it clears his mind nicely, and Hela thinks it sounds more convenient, until Hela asks her to wait a bit, and asks if this happened when she was working as a delivery girl, and then she quickly grows up, calling Sloane a bastard, and asks why she didn't get something like that. And the old man laughs and says that her experiences had helped him develop it. And Hela, completely disgusted, asks him if he has any idea of the difficult times she's been through, and Sloan completely ignores her, saying that the delivery box I give the protagonist is indestructible, so he doesn't have to worry about it. And Tija says he understands. And Tija says there's something else. He asks if there are any rules about who can make requests, and Sloan doesn't quite understand what he means by rules. And Tija explains that the commoners don't even seem to want him to approach them. They get scared at the mere mention of delivering food, and he remembers when he had offered it to the people, and everyone ran away. And then Sloan, smiling, asks the protagonist what would happen if Count Bensley appeared in his kingdom. And Tija replies that he can't say, and maybe he'll be arrested for being a tyrant. And Hela wonders what kind of question that is. And again, Sloan asks what Tija would do if he met Count Bensley there. And the boy replies that he would probably ask the Count how he got to their kingdom. And Hela wants to know the point. And Tija comments that the old man sees as much as he knows. People who already know the different and hymns may be more inclined to make a request, and those who don't may simply react with fear. And he also comments that Adelia had asked if it was a rule that only aristocrats could order. And Hela comments that she never gets anything right. And Tija thinks that she's not entirely wrong. After all, in her kingdom, only aristocrats would have the privilege of knowledge. And Hela asks if he's serious, pretending, and he continues, saying that in any case, it seems that they won't have an easy time convincing any commoner to make the request. But Sloan tells the protagonist that it's up to him internally. Then the old man stands up and asks if that's all the boy wanted to know, and Tija replies that he thinks so. And then Sloan asks him to feel free to call him if he has any other questions. And Tija replies to the old man, saying that he understands and thanks him, while the spirit says goodbye, until Tija suffers a shock. Frustrated, he realizes that there was something else he wanted to ask Sloan, and Hela tells him that he's always slow. Then, curious, she asks what it is, and he says that she didn't realize that the helmet and scooter are not in front. And at that moment, after hearing that, Hela looked doubtful, and she asks if that's what he was so curious about, and he makes it clear to her that it's important. He needs the scooter helmet to feel like a delivery man. And Hela asks the boy if the delivery box isn't enough for that, and Tija answers her, saying that sometimes he feels that this box also disappears, and the spirit tells him that he is the only one who can use this scooter and the helmet. And he asks if she's serious. The spirit replies, saying that if they end up too far from the cabin, they'll automatically be summoned back there, so he doesn't have to worry. But Tija says he can't see them yet, and Hela asks him to try turning the key. And as the delivery man finishes turning the key, asking if she meant it that way, a key suddenly appears in his hand, and he gets quite a fright. Seeing that the white scooter is right in front of him, he asks what just happened, and Hela asks him not to be so fearful. And then he asks the red-haired girl why she hadn't told him before, because he was really worried, and she asks what there is to worry about, and the boy replies that they are both valuable artifacts, so he doesn't want to lose them. And then he approaches the portal, waving and saying that everything is fine, and he's going to prepare the order. And Hela says that she'll see him soon. And then he starts to enter the portal, and Hela says to herself, your helmet is one thing, but she wonders if the delivery box was also linked to the scooter, because she hadn't really thought about it like that. But now that she thinks about it, it seems to have disappeared as well. And then she became a little pensive at that moment, until she realizes something and asks herself if he has simply forgotten, until, while he was climbing the stairs in frustration, his employer realized that he had forgotten to exchange the ring for money, and he gets very angry, punching himself in the head and asking how he could have forgotten. But he prefers to ignore it and walks into the kitchen in high spirits, telling his brother that he's back, scaring the boy, who ends up spitting. Tija gets worried and asks his brother if he's okay, or if he needs to go to the hospital. But Taehyung says he's fine and explains that he choked on his drink. And curious, Tija asks his brother what he was drinking, and Taehyung shows him a tiny potion, saying it was the one. Tija asks what it is and comments that it sounds very interesting, and Taehyung answers his brother, saying that the psychiatrist had recommended that he take it, and he should drink it with water as if it were a medicine, but he has his doubts about whether it's like a placebo effect. Tija asks him if this makes him feel better, and Taehyung tells him that it does, at least so far, and Tija thinks it's very good, and the little potion was already running out, and it was glowing brightly. Then the scene changes, with Tija coming out of the portal and telling the customer that his delivery had arrived, and the spirit was on his shoulder and was eating something and saying that it was very good. And then the boy tells Hela what he had said and, surprise surprise, she tells him that his brother really is an incredible cook. And Gregorio, surprised, asked, "So that's what they eat in other kingdoms?" And Adelia, who was also surprised, commented that it looked different from what she had asked for the last time with her father. And after she said that, Tija comments that the noodles with the sauce are what her sister had ordered, and she'll need to mix the sauce before eating. And he asks if it's right that she remembers the nice, crispy pork. And quite enthusiastically, Adelia said that they were going to start, and Gregorio, analyzing everything like a good observer, commented that the utensils were curious and asked if this was the right way to use them. Holding the hashies, and Tija asked them to enjoy their meal. Then he looks outside and he sees that beautiful sea and is surprised, saying that the view is beautiful, and Hela agrees, and he comments, sighing, that he and his brother need to take a vacation, and she asks if he's had any time off. The young man says no, because they're too busy trying to pay off their debts. And she asks how much they owe, and Tija replies that it's not much. As he earns $6,000 per delivery, it should only take about 60 deliveries to pay for it. And Hela tells him that it seems like a lot to her, and he doesn't disagree. But without this job, it would take 1,000 decades to reach the amount needed to pay off the debt. And the spirit sighs and doesn't disagree with him. And they stay there, looking at that beautiful landscape, while Adelia has a meal with Gregorio, until the spirit catches his eye. And the boy looks doubtful. She turns and looks at Adelia, asking the protagonist how much he trusts that girl. The boy asks what she means by that, and Hela says that it's not like he needs her for anything, and he completely agrees with her. And after he's said that, Hela then asks why he's letting her follow him around, and he gets a bit pensive at that point, and she reminds him that Adelia is Count Benzeli's daughter, and she's just acting friendly to get what she wants. And the boy asks her not to worry, because he's already got everything sorted out. And after he said that, she asks if he's serious, and also asks what his plan is, but Tija says it's a secret, and the spirit is outraged, kicking him, which luckily he manages to defend himself against, and shouting at him that he can stop this bullshit about secrecy, calling him an idiot, and frightened he tells her that it was going to hurt. And Hela says that it was really meant to hurt and calls him an idiot again. She makes it clear that that was the point. And Gregorio, laughing his ass off, tells Adelia that the protagonist is his spirit that seems to form a huge father, and the blonde, visibly surprised after hearing him say this, asks if the old man can see the protagonist's spirit, and Gregorio replies that it's more or less. He can see her well enough to tell that she's beating him up now, at least, and Adelia believes it must be because he's an archmage. And while they're talking, Adelia looks at the protagonist who was being beaten up by the red-haired girl. Then Gregorio asks the blonde if she is jealous of their friendship, and she becomes very frustrated and uncomfortable at that moment, asking what he means by that, and he says that as she is Count Benzeli's daughter, she must have had a very strict upbringing, especially as her older sister never lived up to her father's expectations. And Adelia answers the old man, saying that she hasn't reached their point either, and has a long way to go. And Gregorio tells her that's why he must assume that her father ordered her to follow that man around, and she's speechless, because that's what really happened. As she says nothing, Gregorio comments that he'll take her silence to mean that he's right and he doesn't know what the Count is planning, but he'd like to ask her not to interfere in his research. He has no interest in whatever plans she and her father are ruining, and all that matters to him is his own work. And the blonde says she'll try her best not to get in his way. And then the protagonist cried out in despair, saying that he had said he was sorry, and Gregorio told the girl that she was very intelligent, and she said that he was flattered, but Gregorio comments that it won't be easy, as he picks up the delicious crispy meat and he asks to be excused. And at that, Tija looks at his wrist to see if it's alright. He comments that it really hurt, while Gregorio tells the girl that he's not obliged to follow the ways of their kingdom, and he's fast and powerful to begin with, and he's sure that the protagonist will be a formidable opponent for her. She says that she's already aware of this, And Gregorio asks if that's really it, and comments that it seems she's finally met her match, and starts laughing after she's said it, until he asks her what the purpose of the visit is, and he tries to show that it's not that he's not happy to see her. And Adelia tells the Archmage that she wanted to ask him about the Ring of Courage, and he becomes doubtful at that moment, and she comments that he had engraved her father's name on it before giving it to him, and asks him if he remembers that, until he realizes it, and, wide-eyed, he says yes, and asks what happened, and she explains that recently she had the opportunity to inspect it closely, and it happened that she noticed something strange, and he asked her what this strange thing was that she had noticed, and Adelia says that it looks like the recording is covering some kind of old mark. And Gregorio doesn't disagree with her, saying that he remembers it very well now. And Adelia says that she wanted to ask him if he was trying to cover something up. And the old man tells her that no, someone had already paid that markup before the ring reached him, and he didn't think much of it at the time either. But now she's piqued his interest. The old man was really intrigued. He quickly goes to where the protagonist is and asks if he has the Ring of Courage on, and Tija answers why he has it on, and being quite direct. The old man asks him to let him see, but the protagonist can't understand and asks why, and the girl comments that she wants to check something, and then Gregorio goes to look at the ring and looks thoughtful, while the spirit tells the boy that surely Tija delivered that ring easily, even after all the fuss he made about the delivery box. And Tija comments that it's because it looks like a piece of garbage, and Adelia starts laughing after hearing him say that, until Gregorio says that, to put it simply, it's not the Ring of Courage. And the protagonist is surprised, and Adelia says that if it's not the Ring of Courage, then what is it? And Gregorio, fixing his throat, he says that this is Hephaestus' ring, making a drama, as if he were in a movie. The protagonist doesn't understand what he means, and Hela comments that this is a name she wasn't expecting to hear. And then the delivery box opens by itself, and the spirit stands with his mouth open, asking what the hell is going on, and Tija, visibly frightened, asks why this is happening. And suddenly, the sword comes out, and the sword is floating around, along with Hephaestus' ring and the delivery box, and Gregory, wide-eyed, asks if all these artifacts were forged by Hephaestus, and he drools as he says it, and Tija makes it clear to him that he can't have them, so he should stop drooling, and Hela thinks that's pretty cool, and Adelia agrees with her. And at that moment, the items start to fall, and the protagonist wonders what's going on, and Hela replies that perhaps they think they recognize him as the true master, and Adelia says that she thinks so too, but Hela also thinks it could be dangerous, and Adelia tells the spirit not to frighten him. And there was Tija holding his delivery box, and the system panel shows that he had collected 3 artifacts of Hephaestus. A bonus effect will be applied, and the system panel shows that there were 3 artifacts. But it seems that there were others out there, and the bonus effect was that the artifacts will be linked to him and can be summoned whenever he wants. And at that moment, Tija doesn't understand, seeing the system panel showing that it was linked to him, and the spirit asks what that is and what's going on. And the boy answers her, saying that apparently it has some bonus effect, and she asks what he means by that. And Adelia comments that he must have unlocked it by collecting artifacts. And Gregorio says that it's really a Hephaestus ring, and then Hela asks the protagonist to check the ring again, and he says that everything is fine, and the blonde is really curious about it, and Gregorio makes it clear that he is too, and Tija stares at the ring Hephaestus, god of the forge, made to commemorate his marriage to his wife, Aphrodite, goddess of beauty. This year I can never be destroyed, and the wearer must remain faithful to one woman for the rest of their life, or suffer the torment of hell. And the special ability Light of Work is available, and looking at the description, Tija thinks the artifact is useless, and at the same time, he thinks about the special ability, called Work Light, because he thinks it's a joke, and he sees the description of the Light of Work, which is an ability that Hephaestus invented to prevent him from becoming lazy, and tells him to hold a ring high above his head for 5 seconds to activate it. All those who see the light begin to work as hard as they can, and don't stop until the owner of the ring allows it. And Tija, seeing that description, is completely shocked, saying that this special ability sounds more like a diabolical violation of labor law, and he doesn't think there's any use for it. And Hela asks what it is, and Adelia, also curious, asks what kind of ability it is, and Tija, visibly affected, answers them both, saying that it's absolutely nothing. Then he asks Gregorio if he could tell him what it means for an artifact to be linked to him, and for a moment the old man looks doubtful, until he explains that this means the item will remain by his side until death do them part. And Tija wonders how it could be that way, because until death do him part something is very strange to him, and Gregorio says that there is no other way for him to get rid of it, and even if he tries to give the item to someone else, that ring will simply come back to him, and extremely shocked. The protagonist says that this can't be happening, and the Archmage continues, saying that in the past, there were magicians who tried to use this effect to deceive others. As most of the artifacts fitted had an orientation effect, they sold them to unsuspecting buyers, and Adelia becomes apprehensive, seeing Tija simply kneeling on the floor and asks if he's alright, and Hela asks what the problem is, but Tija, desperate, asks about his money.